Chapter 427. At this moment, a long howl came from afar. Immediately after, a powerful divine aura rushed over with overwhelming momentum. Not long after, the entire ground began to tremble. That's the divine realm's chimera. It broke the seal. The elves' faces were filled with fear. After all, the last time the chimera went on a rampage, it left a deep impression on them. However, what they didn't know was that the chimera wasn't the one who broke the seal. It was Keith who released it. Don't panic, don't panic. Our elven race's divine realm expert, High Priestess Undine, is here. Dobin glanced at Undine beside him. He called out loudly. Hearing the divine realm's expert, Undine's name, the panicked elves finally calmed down. What Dobin did not see was that when the chimera appeared, traces of haze spread over Undine's face. What a terrifying power! Is this the power of a divine realm's beast? Ron took a deep breath. The moment I heard the roar, I could barely move my body. That's right. A glint flashed across Aurora's eyes. This is the chimera, an exotic beast from the divine domain. I will never forget its terrifying and powerful attack power. Slya said angrily. Keith is really sinister. Knowing that he can't escape, he actually came here to break the chimera's seal. Elian said, people like him are the most terrifying. Even if they know that they will die, they will still cause trouble for their opponents. Sigh, the elven race is about to face another catastrophe. Dideli smiled. Don't worry, High Priestess Undine is here. With her ability, defeating this chimera should not be a problem. Aurora heard this and fell silent. After a while, she sighed. I hope so. Woo! Yeah, right at this moment, a strange sound came from afar. It was like the sound of weapons grinding against each other, sharp and ear-piercing. Immediately after, a figure approached from afar with a terrifying aura. Wherever he went, a powerful storm would be set off. When Ron saw the chimera, he was stunned. In front of him was a colossus, from the beginning to the end of a pornographic novel. Its tail was no less than 50 meters long, and it had 2 heads, each of which could hold 3 to 5 adults. When it spread its wings, it was more than 80 meters long. It was Ron's first time seeing such a huge beast. The super Dakura he had seen in the other plane was comparable to it, but Chimera's aura continued to rise. Undine gritted her teeth and held on bitterly. She also realized that the elves could not take another step back, and she was the hope of the entire elven race. The elves' hearts sank as Undine's power fell. They knew that the High Priestess of the Divine Realm, whom they were most proud of, would not be able to hold on for much longer. Some of the elves began to pray secretly. However, the elves' prayers did not take effect. At this moment, a loud sound came from the sky. The dark green figure, carrying countless hopes, fell and crashed heavily into the mountain wall. The mountain wall also cracked like a spider's web, letting out a deafening sound, and at the same time, a cloud of dust rose into the air. High Priestess! Everyone was dumbfounded and their minds went blank. The strongest of the elves, the divine realm, the natural magic god, the senator, the High Priestess of the elves, Undine, who had a series of titles, had been defeated, and it was a crushing defeat. To see the first commercial-free article, please go to www.grain.com. Chapter 428. High Priestess. All the powerhouses of the sacred domain present were shocked. Grainweb Grandma, Aurora and Shea shouted at the same time, their faces full of anxiety. Ha ha ha! Keith laughed wildly, looking at Undine proudly. High Priestess, to think that you would have such a day. Ha ha! Powerhouses of the sacred domain, are you very impressive? Aren't you still suppressed by me? Undine struggled to get up. At this moment the corner of her mouth was stained with blood. She gritted her teeth and looked at the sky helplessly. Due to the constant wear and tear, her strength was no match for Mira of Library 56. Ha ha! Keith laughed wildly, powerhouses of the elf race, kneel before me. As long as you submit to me, I can save your lives. Otherwise, what awaits you is the destruction of your race. Don't even think about it." Dobin fiercely spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva. At this moment he was seriously injured, but he still held on, unwilling to submit. "Even if we die, we will never surrender to a demon like you." Hearing this, Keith laughed loudly. "Demon, haha, demon, that's right, I am a demon, I like this name." Suddenly Keith stopped laughing, looking at Dobin with a sinister smile. "Haha, Dobin, you are right this time. To tell you the truth, I am from the demon race of the infernal realm." Chapter 429. Pornographic novels? Demon clan? Undead main plane? The sudden appearance of these two terms scared everyone silly. Many people had never heard of this before. Only Undine's expression was extremely ugly. She finally knew the origin of the other party. "Take a look. Grain web." Undine gritted her teeth and softly spat out two words, "Divine realm." Ron stood by the side and clearly heard Undine's words. His heart moved, and he hurriedly asked, "Grandma Undine, what is the divine realm?" He was of the same generation as Aurora, and he also called Undine Grandma. Undine glanced at him and shook her head. "Ron, with your current strength, it's best that you don't ask about this." Ron did not expect to be rebuffed. He bitterly touched his nose and smiled awkwardly. Undine sensed Ron's awkwardness and smiled at him. "Ron, I'm doing this for your own good. You haven't reached this level of strength, so it's best that you don't ask about this." "It's not good for you," Ron thought for a moment and asked, "Then when can I ask about it?" "At least reach the sacred domain." "Alien races." Elder Dobin took a deep breath. "So that's how it is. I understand. Your goal is to conquer the entire Noah continent." Hee. Keith's facial muscles twitched a few times, and he revealed a cruel smile. "Unfortunately, you understand it too late. If you don't choose to be tamed, then all of you can go to hell," Keith sneered. He put the strange flute to his mouth and gently played it. Woo-woo, along with the sharp and strange sound, the chimera's eyes shone brightly, becoming crimson red. With a wild roar, its aura erupted like a mountain as it madly pounced towards Dobin and the others. At this moment, all the elves fell into despair. Right at this moment, there was a loud boom. The sound of a mountain collapsing and the earth cracking could be heard. Immediately after, the earth began to shake violently. "Why is there an earthquake? I can't stand properly." The sudden tremors caused many elves to lose their balance, and they all shouted for shelter. Ron and Aurora reached out to support Undine. Ron asked, What's going on?" Undine shook her head, indicating that she did not know. On the other side, Keith's expression was also tense, because these movements were not caused by him. The earthquake was getting more and more intense. At this moment, a loud voice came from the east, and a powerful aura swept over like a storm. Immediately after, a huge cloud of dust flew into the air. Accompanied by a shocking roar, a huge figure slowly stood up from the ground. "What's that? What is that?" The elves pointed at the huge figure and screamed. Their eyes were filled with horror. That was an extremely huge creature. Ron turned his head and looked. He couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The creature in front of him was too huge. He saw that its body was dozens of stories high when it stood up. There was a mountain next to it, and Mara only had 56 stacks of books to blast it away. Chapter 430. Keith felt his surroundings darken. A huge shadow appeared in front of him, growing bigger and bigger until it completely enveloped him. Not good! Keith was shocked, but his reaction was still agile. With a whoosh, he disappeared from where he stood. Boom! The huge tree viciously struck the chimera's head. The chimera cried out in pain as its huge body fell heavily to the ground, creating a huge cloud of dust. Everyone was stunned. A casual strike from the mountain giant was actually so powerful. With just one strike, one of the chimera's heads was already heavily injured. Its entire head split open like a watermelon, and blood flowed out like a fountain. The mountain giant's thunderous voice rang out again, but his tone was still admonishing, "Leave. If you don't leave now, you'll all die here. Hurry up and get up." Keith played his flute quickly and urgently. The chimera lived up to its name as a divine beast. Although one of its heads was injured, it relied on its other head to control its body and quickly got up. It flapped its wings rapidly, and its body rose high into the air. Very quickly, the chimera flapped its wings and flew into the air. It opened its mouth wide in the air, and a huge bolt of lightning struck down once again. Boom! 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 This time, it was the chimera's turn to counterattack. Bolts of lightning as thick as buckets ruthlessly struck the mountain giant's body. Lightning flashed everywhere, and waves of earth rose more than 3 feet high. "Run!" The elves were frightened. They quickly dodged, afraid that the lightning would strike them. After all, the white lightning moving about on the ground could also cause great harm to living creatures. Roar! The mountain giant let out a loud roar. He took a large step forward and stretched out his hands, using the most heroic stance to welcome the thunderbolts that came crashing down like raindrops. "He's protecting our elves." Seeing this scene, Elder Marlowe came to a realization and shouted loudly, his voice filled with excitement. "That's right." Wes nodded. "The mountain giant Montan is a guardian from ancient times. He has been protecting the elves until now. He's powerful and has strong defense. His only weakness is that he doesn't have any means to deal with aerial attack." "There's no way to deal with aerial attacks?" Dobin was shocked. "If that's the case, doesn't that mean sooner or later?" Weiss nodded as he looked at the mountain giant with a deep gaze. "His defense is very strong, so he should be able to last a little longer. However, only the heavens know how long he can last." On the other side, Keith seemed to have seen through the fact that the big guy didn't have any means of attacking the air. Lightning poured down wantonly, and for a moment, the mountain giant's body almost turned white. The lightning continued to wreak havoc on the mountain giant's body. Gradually, the mountain giant began to falter. A pained expression appeared on its face. No matter how strong its defense was, it couldn't last long in a battle where it couldn't fight back. Keith also seemed to know that the mountain giant didn't have any means to control the air, so he attacked even more fiercely. This was a battle of willpower and strength, and the outcome of this battle would determine the fate of the elf race. "Fucking shameless! Don't fly into the air. Come down and fight if you have the guts." At this moment, the elves were also cursing. The magicians and archers among them were attacking with all their might. In a moment, countless magic arrows were shot into the air, bombarding the chimera. However, to the chimera, these low to mid-level spells were nothing more than a drizzle. They couldn't hurt it at all. "What do we do? What do we do?" Celia and the other elves were anxious, their gazes constantly drifting towards Undine. At this point, only High Priestess Undine had the ability to cause damage to the chimera. As long as she joined forces with the mountain giant, they would definitely be able to defeat the chimera. However, Undine's eyes were tightly shut at this moment. She was clutching a dark green ball tightly in her hand, desperately recovering her strength. After an unknown period of time, under the chimera's frenzied attacks, the mountain giant's body swayed, as if it was about to fall. This caused the elves to cry out in alarm, but in the end it relied on its strong willpower to stand firm. However, everyone knew that the Guardian, who was known for his strong defense, wouldn't be able to last much longer. Once the mountain giant fell, the elves would be enslaved. The situation was extremely dangerous. Pornographic novels. Ron took a deep breath. His gaze towards the mountain giant was filled with sadness. It seemed that this huge giant had a kind heart. He was determined to sacrifice himself to protect these elves. At this moment, a low sobbing sound came from the side. Ron turned his head in shock. Please, please hold on a little longer." Aurora kept shooting, large teardrops rolling down her cheek. Her face was filled with anxiety. She hoped that the mountain giant could hold on a little longer. This way, her grandmother would be able to recover a little more strength. Aurora! Understanding Aurora's feelings, Ron gritted his teeth fiercely. He stretched out his hand, and a black thing as thin as a strand of hair floated in his palm, wriggling like an earthworm. Death Divine Power. This was Ron's final trump card. He knew that this trump card could only be used once. It could be said that it was his lifeblood. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he wouldn't use it. However, for the elves, for Aurora, Ron decided to use it. Has the time finally come? Ron smiled. Holding the Death God power in his hand, he looked at Keith and sneered. A gleam of determination flashed in his eyes. A devil from hell, huh? Very good. Then, let me send you back to hell. All right. Just as Ron was about to attack, Undine suddenly opened her eyes. At this moment, Undine's eyes had turned dark green, and her eyes were shining brightly. Undine's grandmother. Ron was stunned. A green figure flashed, and Undine's body suddenly shot out. Undine's speed was extremely fast. With a whoosh, she appeared beside the mountain giant's ear and stood on his tall shoulder. Eh? A demigod elf? The mountain giant was surprised and delighted. Are you going to join forces with me to defeat this fellow? That's right. Undine's face had a smile. However, I was heavily injured and have only recovered 30% of my strength. The mountain giant said without hesitation. As long as you bring this fellow down, I can defeat it. Undine nodded and smiled. It won't be difficult to bring it down. After saying that, Undine's smile turned cold. She waved her dark green magic staff and chanted in a low voice. Boundless power of nature, you are the source of all life. When the sky darkens, when evil descends, when the beautiful scenery is gone, when all life trembles in fear, your appearance is like the dawn in the darkness, awakening all life and making the world radiance reappear. When Undine finished chanting a spell, she raised her staff high, and a powerful force of nature condensed into a small ball, and a green force of nature pressed down fiercely. Go, nature's binding. The dark green ball suddenly pressed down on the ground and sank deep into the ground. Isn't that Undine? Has she recovered her strength? Keith looked at Undine, who was casting a spell, and was shocked and suspicious. At this moment, there was a slight tremor on the ground. The tremor was very small at first, but then it became bigger and bigger, as if something was about to break out of the ground. Boom! The ground suddenly split open and a dark green giant vine rushed out of the ground and swept towards the sky. Under Undine's powerful divine domain, the giant vine grew quickly, longer and taller. This giant vine was so thick that it would take 10 people to wrap their arms around it. It went straight for Keith, who was in the sky. What is this? Keith was shocked. At this moment, it was too late for him to control the chimera to dodge. The vines hit the chimera's body, and then countless tentacle-like things extended out of it and grew crazily. In a short while, the entire chimera was tightly wrapped. Damn it! Keith was flustered. At this moment, he was also tied up by the vines. No. Not good. Keith finally understood. He struggled with all his might. At this moment, his hand loosened and the flute fell down. My flute! Keith cried out in alarm. His body moved and the chimera's huge body kept falling down. It was being pulled down by the giant vines. Not long after, the vines had already pulled him to the ground. Undine was panting heavily, and her body was on the verge of collapsing. It was as if she had used up all her strength. She glanced at the mountain giant and said in a low voice, "Quick, I can't hold on for long. This is already enough." The mountain giant knew that he should take advantage of this opportunity. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and roared. He reached out and grabbed the thickest tree and walked in front of the chimera. He swung the heavy tree and smashed it down on the chimera. "It's over." Keith's mind was blank. He could only watch as the huge tree fell on the chimera's head. His head, boom, 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 once, twice, thrice. The heavy giant would ruthlessly struck the bound chimera's body, causing it to cry out in pain. It struggled with all its might, but how could it be so easy to break free from the tightly bound, natural bondage? It could only take a dozen hits from the mountain giant. Good, good, kill it. Kill this fellow. The mountain giant's display of power caused the elves to cheer for him. They were all cheering for this scene. Of course, they did not forget their divine realm elite, nature priestess Undine. At this moment, she had used up all of her remaining strength and was sitting on the ground, unable to get up for a long time. Finally, the powerful chimera from the divine realm collapsed under the cheers of the elves. Chapter 431. Remember, Jean gone in 1 second, and provide you with interesting novels to read. We won. We won, we finally won. The elves cheered. Not only Dobin, but even Undine had tears in her eyes. They finally defeated the chimera from the divine domain. Anyone who participated in the battle knew that it was not easy. Hee hee. Mountain giant Montan laughed heartily. He threw down the huge tree in his hand and rubbed his head. I am a person who likes to write pornographic novels. I am a pacifist. I don't like to fight. Finally, I don't need it anymore. Ron let out a sigh of relief. He lowered his head, and the death god energy in his hand slowly disappeared. If it was not necessary, he really did not want to use this trump card in his hand. Ron, we won. Aurora cheered and threw herself into Ron's arms, sobbing softly. Slya cheered. Elian and the others also let out a sigh of relief. There was a slight commotion under Chimera's body. Cough, cough, cough. Keith climbed up from the pile of rocks with difficulty. At this moment, his face was covered in dust. He did not look like the great elder of the elven race at all. Furthermore, he was seriously injured. His face was covered in dust and blood. He's not dead yet? Dobin frowned when he saw him. He immediately walked towards him with large strides. The others also followed. After suffering such a huge blow, it was very surprising that the former great elder Keith did not die. However, no one took this to heart. Keith's true strength was only at the sacred domain. There were dozens of sacred domain experts here. He could not escape even if he wanted to, let alone fight. Great Elder Keith, you did not think that you would have such a day? Dobin said in a low voice. We elves are an excellent race with a long history. How can we be overthrown by a foreign race like you with schemes? When Keith slowly stood up, he found himself surrounded by elves. These elves' eyes were filled with anger. Ha ha ha! Excellent race! Keith could not help but laugh. You elves are an excellent race? Ha ha! Conservative, closed-minded, ignorant, backward, and arrogant. How can such a race be considered an outstanding race? I've really opened my eyes today. Keith's eyes flashed with a hint of mockery. If it weren't for your elven ancestors leaving you with such an excellent gift, I'm afraid you elves would have disappeared in the long river of history with your way of doing things. Dobin and the others had ugly expressions on their faces, but they had to admit that what he said was true. For 100,000 years, the elves had not taken a single step out of the elven forest. They had neither expanded nor shrunk. They lived peacefully like this. If they did not provoke others, others would not dare to provoke them. As a result, the entire elf clan became conservative and closed-minded, backward and ignorant. Due to their outstanding talents, they became extremely arrogant. This is the elves, who have not changed in 100,000 years. Just because of a few spies, the entire elven race was turned upside down. This was all caused by their conservative, backward, and ignorance. They had never come into contact with the outside world, so naturally, they had no knowledge. Dobin took a deep breath and said coldly, Keith, you are no longer the great elder of our elf clan. You no longer have the right to interfere with the affairs of the elf clan. Dobin paused for a moment. Now that things have come to this, what do you have to say? Looking at the enemy who had caused all this, the eyes of all the elves turned red. Their anger was expressed on their faces. Kill him! At this moment, someone shouted. Following that, the anger of all the elves was ignited. Kill him! Kill him! Kill him! The crowd of elves was agitated. They shouted loudly, and the weapons in their hands were heavily smashed onto the ground, setting off waves of sound. The sound waves became louder and louder, louder and louder. Undine and Corbett looked at each other and sighed. Keith had only himself to blame for ending up in this state. With what he had done, it would not be an exaggeration to say that he had died 10 times over. Facing close to 100,000 angry elves, Keith could only smile coldly. Dobin, Weiss, Luvina, and the other elders glanced at each other and cast inquiring gazes. The other elders thought for a moment and nodded heavily. Dobin quickly understood their meaning and said with a cold face, "Let's go and see what's going on." With a cold expression, he said, "Great Elder Keith has betrayed the elf clan and deliberately instigated a civil war, causing great losses to the elf clan. This is a heinous crime. After careful consideration, the Elder Council of the elf clan has decided to sentence Great Elder Keith to death. This will be carried out immediately." Weiss sneered. "Keith, you are still considered lucky. Although you are about to die, you have regained your position as the Great Elder before you die. You have admitted to what you have done for the elf clan. Haha, you can die in peace." Dobin nodded and said, "Do it. Leave him with an intact corpse." "Let me do it." At this time, a blood elf sword saint walked over. Like the other elves, his face was filled with anger. With a swish, he unsheathed his shining long sword and bowed to Elder Dobin. Dobin nodded in agreement. That blood elf sword saint raised the longsword in his hand, gritted his teeth, and said hatefully, "Keith, thanks to you, I lost my brother in a conflict with elves of the same race. My own brother, and all of this was driven by your evil lies. Today, I'm going to kill you to avenge my brother." After saying this, that cold longsword was about to stab down. Ha ha ha! At this time, Keith finally couldn't restrain himself and laughed loudly. His laughter reverberated, causing everyone's eardrums to hurt. "With just you? You want to kill me? Dream on." At this moment, a sinister smile appeared on Keith's face. He flipped his hand and a black fireball appeared in his palm. "Come out, Lord Soul. Let these elves see your power. What is that?" Everyone was shocked as that fireball slowly turned into the shape of a person. When Soul came out and saw Keith's appearance, he was shocked. "Keith, how did you end up like this?" Keith smiled. "Lord Soul, this is a long story. I will tell you slowly when there is time, but for now I need to borrow your strength." After saying this, Keith didn't wait for Soul's reply and grabbed that black fireball and swallowed it. Chapter 432. Booknet is not good, quickly stop him. Although he did not know why, Dobin felt that something was wrong and quickly ran over. He subconsciously wanted to stop Keith's actions, but it was already too late. Keith had already swallowed that bundle of black flames. Boom! Powerful black flames erupted from Keith's body and spread out in all directions like a halo. The Blood Elf Grand Sword Master closest to him was sent flying by the shockwave. "Ha ha 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 ha! Too late, you're too late!" Keith's body floated in the air, his whole body wrapped in black flames. That was the destructive power from hell. Keith had forcibly fused with Thor's remnant soul. At this moment, he already had a part of Thor's power. The black flames on Keith's body became more and more vigorous, and his power also soared. At this moment, the black flames turned into a black ball of light. The diameter of this black ball of light became bigger and bigger, and the black flames filled the sky like a black sun, illuminating the bright sky into darkness. Not good. Undine opened her eyes wide. She did not expect that the outcome that she thought would be certain of victory would be reversed at this moment. What she did not expect was that this reversal would be disastrous. This is bad. Everyone's face was filled with shock. Keith's power was too terrifying, causing their bodies to involuntarily tremble. That's an incomplete soul. Ron took a deep breath, and a trace of seriousness appeared on his face. From the power of this remnant soul, the owner of this soul is unimaginably powerful. At this moment, the black ball of light emitted a glaring light. Finally, everything in front of them started to return to normal. The black flames slowly dispersed, revealing Keith's true appearance. What? Seeing the scene in front of them, everyone's hearts were filled with shock. Because of fear, their bodies began to tremble involuntarily. What appeared in front of them was a huge monster with a strange appearance. This monster's face was very similar to Keith's, but its body was abnormally huge. From head to toe, it was more than 7 meters tall. Its body was full of muscles and was full of strength. The monster had a pair of huge horns on its head, and its blood-red eyes were filled with evil. The most eye-catching thing was the pair of huge wings on its back, gently flapping, exuding a majestic aura. This is a demigod powerhouse. This alien is actually so powerful. Upon seeing Keith, mountain giant Montan's face darkened. At this moment, there was a hint of seriousness on his face. He scratched his head and said, "I'm afraid this matter is a little troublesome." Divine realm expert. Dobin's teeth were chattering. His heart was filled with fear and despair. At this moment, he knew very well what the appearance of a god realm powerhouse meant. "We're finished." Undine closed her eyes in pain. She had used up all her strength in that attack just now. Keith floated quietly in the air. He lowered his head and looked at his hand. His bloodthirsty eyes were filled with disbelief. This power is too strong. This is a god realm. This is the power of a god realm. A god realm expert was called a demigod in their world. Keith did not expect that the remaining power of Lord Thor would be so strong that he had accidentally advanced to the god realm. Keith raised his head coldly. His eyes were filled with killing intent. He looked at the elves as if he was looking at dead people. Although this power did not belong to him, it was enough to deal with these elves who did not know what was good for them. Who are you?" Dobin suppressed the fear in his heart and stuttered. At this moment, he could not even speak clearly. "Haha, Elder Dobin, are you asking me?" When Keith heard this, he turned to look at Dobin and sneered, "There's no harm in telling you. In our world, this form is called a demigod expert. Of course, they have another name." At this point, Keith deliberately paused and softly spat out a word. "Great Demon." The 3 words, Great Demon, shook everyone's hearts. Great demons were described in all the literature and legends of the Noah continent. They were powerful, bloodthirsty, evil, and full of power. However, no one thought that such a creature actually existed in this world. The blood-red muscles, the black flames that kept jumping, and Keith's smile that was filled with killing intent. All of these turned into the legendary ultimate evil creature, the legendary Great Demon. "Keith, what are you trying to do?" Elder Marlowe of the Blood Elf clan swallowed hard and asked in a hoarse voice. "What am I trying to do?" Keith smiled faintly. His eyes narrowed, and traces of killing intent appeared on his face. "You foolish elves ruined my plan, so today, all of you will die." The wings on Keith's back flapped violently, and a gust of wind blew. The gust of wind was mixed with black flames, burning everyone's faces. "I'm going to kill all of you. I'm going to destroy the world tree of your elf clan. I'm going to destroy everything you have. You elves are not willing to submit to me, so you're destined to disappear from this world." Pornographic novels. Keith shouted crazily and released the power of his divine territory without any scruples. "I won't let you do that." Before Keith could finish his words, a huge figure suddenly stood out. It was the mountain giant Montan. he said in a low, muffled voice. "Outsider, you're very powerful. Although I don't know where you're from or what your purpose is in coming to the Elf Clan, as the guardian of the Elf Clan, I can't let you do whatever you want," Keith sneered. "Haha, an elemental creature from God knows where dares to boast shamelessly in front of me. Although your power has reached the divine territory, you're far from being my match. After I fuse with Lord Thor's soul, my power will be the strongest in the Noah continent." Keith's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Since you're in such a hurry to die, I'll fulfill your wish, Scythe of Destruction." At this moment, a huge black scythe appeared in Keith's hand out of thin air. The huge black scythe cut through the sky with a powerful force and slammed down on Montan. Petrified skin. Montan didn't have outstanding attack power. Besides, Keith was in the air, so Montan couldn't hit him at all. He could only use his strongest defense. Boom! The huge black scythe slammed into the mountain giant's chest, creating huge sparks. The mountain giant once again used his sturdy body to protect the elves. The mountain giants weren't a powerful fighting race. They were most proud of their huge bodies and their sturdy bodies, but they had very few defensive and offensive means. Even so, Montan was still a divine territory through and through. At least, the Chimera had been beaten up by him to the point that it couldn't get up until now. However, Montan miscalculated this time. The huge black scythe slashed across, and there was a sound of heaven and earth shattering. Under Montan's astonished gaze, a huge hole appeared in his sturdy body, and gravel flew everywhere. After being hit by the huge black scythe, the mountain giant lost his balance. His huge body tilted and began to fall to the ground. "Oh no, dodge!" Dobin saw this and jumped up anxiously. "Run!" Seeing the mountain giant fall to the ground, the elves all ran away. The mountain giant's fall wasn't so easy. Its huge body fell heavily to the ground. It was the shore of the island in the middle of the lake. There was a huge sound, and the entire island seemed to have been flipped over. The waves were more than 10 feet high. The mountain giant, who was as tall as a mountain, fell down. There was a huge hole in his chest. This time, he couldn't stand up anymore. It was as if cold water had been poured over their heads. At this moment, everyone was stunned. One move, just one move, and he defeated the mountain giant, who had the strength of a divine territory and was famous for its defense. Keith's current strength had far surpassed his initial strength. Ha ha ha! Die, all of you die. Defeating the mountain giant meant that no one could stop him anymore. Amidst his maniacal laughter, Keith raised his hand, and the huge scythe of destruction slammed down again. There was a huge sound like a landslide. The huge mountain rock was smashed into pieces, and countless pieces of rock fell down. Many elves were sent flying by the powerful impact. Some elves were seriously injured, and some even died. Seeing this scene, Dobin's heart was bleeding. Compared to the other races, the elves did not have a large population. Every death of an elf was a huge loss to the elves. However, facing a great demon with the strength of a divine territory, Dobin was at a loss. He had no choice but to look at Undine for help. Undine sighed. She naturally knew what Dobin meant. On the surface, it seemed that only she, who was also a divine territory expert, could defeat Keith. Undine shook her head helplessly. At this moment, she couldn't do anything without any strength. Keith was right. With his current strength, even if he wasn't the strongest in the Noah continent, he was close. Among the divine territory experts in the Noah continent, there were very few who could defeat him. Even if Undine recovered all her strength, she might not be a match for him now. Thinking of this, a figure appeared in Undine's mind. It was the genius girl known as the Dragons. She was also the president of the Parliament of the Noah continent, Frigga. She might be the only one who could fight Keith now. However, Frigga was far away on Dragon Island. Even if she wanted to help, she couldn't come over. Moreover, she wouldn't know what was happening in the elves. Could it be that today is the day the elves perish? Undine's face was blank. She muttered, "But it seems like the goddess of nature didn't give any warnings," Keith attacked crazily. "He wasn't killing people. Instead, he seemed to be venting his anger. Under his rampage, the entire elves suffered a catastrophe." Chapter 433. Kill, kill, kill. One after another, the spheres of destruction bombarded the area. Keith's eyes were bloodshot. Amidst his maniacal laughter, the elves fell in droves. Let's go all out," Dobin gritted his teeth. With bloodshot eyes, he lunged forward and mercilessly attacked Keith with magic. At this moment, he couldn't care less anymore. Kill! The elves of the sacred domain roared in unison. There was a trace of despair in that roar. Ha! The elves of the sacred domain roared in unison. They opened their domains one after another. At this moment, the entire elven race was finally going all out. The sky above the island was filled with tragic desolation. Facing the attacks of dozens of sacred domain elves, Keith didn't care at all. He laughed loudly. Still the same old trick. Do you think you can defeat me with numbers? Wasn't the lesson just now enough? Quantity couldn't make up for quality. The Chimera just now defeated all the elves of the sacred domain. Now that it encountered an even more powerful great demon, the human wave tactic had long lost its meaning. Amidst his maniacal laughter, the black flames on Keith's body intensified. He raised his right hand high, and a black vortex of energy spun in his palm. Then, he released his most powerful battle skill, Scythe of Destruction. The air suddenly froze, and a huge black scythe appeared out of thin air. With a powerful and oppressive aura, it slammed down. There was an earth-shattering sound. It was as if nothing in the world could stop this tyrannical power. The huge mountain was split open in the middle like tofu. The huge black scythe slashed across, and the elves of the sacred domain elves' domains exploded. Like kites with broken strings, they fell to the ground one by one. Dobin's body fell heavily to the ground. He was seriously injured. After a long time, he struggled to get up. There was a deep wound from his right chest to his left abdomen. Blood was constantly dripping from it. Dobin's face was full of pain. However, this pain didn't come from his fatal injuries. It came from his heart. If death could save the elves, Dobin would do it without hesitation. Undine stood up with difficulty. Ron's strength hadn't reached the sacred domain. How could he fly in the sky without the help of anything? It's time. Ron, who was standing in the sky, slowly raised his head and looked at Keith, who was wreaking havoc not far away, with a cold look in his eyes. Killing innocent people is unforgivable. Ron's tightly clenched hand slowly opened, and a bunch of black threads pulsed in his palm. Divine power of death. Ron only had a trace of divine power of death. At this critical moment, for the survival of the elves, Ron decided to use it. Ron's heart was moved. He saw that trace of divine power of death enter his palm like a snake. Not long after, that small trace of divine power of death disappeared and entered Ron's body. At this moment, Ron felt his body heat up, and a force rose with a whoosh. This power is too familiar. Ron's body trembled. He was trembling because of excitement. That trace of divine power of death seemed to be incomparably compatible with his body. Once it entered his body, it quickly fused with him. Ping! Ron's body erupted with a large amount of black energy. At the same time, his pitch-black eyes also turned green. The divine power of death entered his body and burst forth with unparalleled power. After absorbing this trace of divine power of death, Ron's soul rapidly strengthened. The black energy continued to spread. Soon it turned into a black fog. The black fog flowed like water and unknowingly covered half the sky. With a hissing sound, the black fog continued to expand. Ron's soul was on the verge of bursting. At the same time, his soul force continued to rise. Divine power erupted. A burst of energy fiercely spread. In an instant, the entire sky became gloomy. It was as if a huge boulder was pressing down. Eh? What's that? What's that? At this time, Ron was like a black cloud floating in the sky. It was difficult not to attract attention. When the elves saw Ron, they cried out in alarm. What? What's that? Keith suddenly opened his eyes wide. His face was full of disbelief. Impossible, that human actually has divine power. Dobin was flabbergasted. The power in the sky was too strong. It was so strong that it far exceeded his imagination. It's that human boy. Wes, who had turned into a wyvern, quickly recognized Ron. But in the next moment, his eyes suddenly opened wide. What divine power? That boy actually has divine power? On the ground, Undine sucked in a breath of cold air. Divine power, it's actually divine power. Just where did that boy Ron come from? Grandma, what is godly power? Aurora asked Undine, still in a daze for a long time. It's hard to explain in a few words. Undine smiled. You only need to know one thing. His current strength has already surpassed mine. Ron's strength has surpassed Grandma's. Aurora's eyes opened wide. How is that possible? Slya excitedly shouted. Could it be he can defeat Keith? Undine smiled and nodded with certainty. As long as he wants to, he can definitely do it. A guy with divine power. Interesting. Corbett smiled. I already said that this boy is not simple. He has a lot of secrets. It's the divine power of death. Keith quickly confirmed the attribute of the divine power on Ron's body. It was different from his own destruction energy. The divine power of death was a superpower from another main plane. How is that possible? Could it be that a god from the main plane of the undead has come to the Noah continent? Keith clenched his teeth. If that was the case, he would not be able to contend against him. The difference between a god-level expert and a true god was too great. Moreover, the divine power of death was notoriously difficult to deal with. However, the human boy in front of him was clearly not one of them. This made him slightly relieved. At this moment, Keith thought for a while and asked loudly, Human boy, who are you? Why do you have the divine power of death? Ron smiled coldly. Who I am is not important. What's important is that you must die today. As he spoke, he raised his hand and used the divine power of death to summon a bone spear, just like what Grandpa Homelin had taught him. A bone spear infused with divine power was no longer an ordinary bone spear. This bone spear was completely black and emitted a powerful energy of death. Death Spear. The Death Spear that had destroyed half of Asinaris in one strike finally appeared in Ron's hands. The moment the Death Spear was summoned, the power on Ron's body flourished. His body was covered in black fog, and he was not at a disadvantage in the slightest when compared to Keith in his great demon form. In fact, he was even stronger. The elves recovered from their shock. At this moment, they could see that this human strength was not to be underestimated. Come on, kill him. Yes, kill him. Kill him. Pornographic novels, the elves shouted one after another. The instant they saw Ron, their eyes filled with hope. No. You can't kill me. Seeing that Ron was about to attack, Keith hurriedly waved his hands. We're both part of the evil faction. You can't kill me. Evil suborder. Ron froze. What is the evil suborder? Hell and the undead plane belong to the same faction. Simply put, we're on the same side, so you can't kill me. Keith hurriedly explained the relationship between the two in the most concise manner possible. Although he had transformed into a great demon, he didn't want to fight someone with divine power. What he didn't expect was that Ron didn't know anything and didn't understand what he was saying. Hell's main plane? Undead plane? Same faction? You don't know what you're talking about? Ron didn't understand at all. He shrugged. Your flowery words are meaningless. You slaughtered an entire race of elves, so you're my enemy. So you must die today. After saying this, Ron no longer hesitated. He threw the death spear in his hand, carrying the hope of all elves at Keith. Chapter 434. Ron threw the spear of death in his hand with all his might. The spear of death flew towards Keith with a violent gust of wind. Library 56. The spear of death drew a beautiful trajectory in the air, but what followed behind this beautiful trajectory was a terrifying death. Keith did not expect Ron to attack without giving him a chance to beg for mercy. Seeing that the terrifying black spear was about to reach him, Keith gritted his teeth and shouted. The scythe of destruction blasted out in an instant. The scythe of destruction appeared out of thin air with a powerful destructive force. With a whistling sound, it rushed towards the spear of death. Boom! The two forces collided with a terrifying black flame that covered the entire sky. This was a fierce collision between the power of destruction and the power of death. At this time, Keith was dumbfounded. When the two forces collided, the power of destruction melted like snow. The spear of death shattered the scythe of destruction and mercilessly stabbed towards Keith's great demon body. One side had the power of destruction at its peak, while the other side had the divine power of death, which was a terrifying power of a higher level. The result was obvious. No, no, Keith desperately waved his hand, his face full of despair. Bang! The spear of death mercilessly stabbed into Keith's chest. Then there was an earth-shattering explosion. Boom! A dazzling black light lit up and illuminated the entire sky. Like a total solar eclipse, the entire sky darkened. Not long after, the powerful power of death began to spread. A huge black ball of light appeared in the sky above the elf forest. It carried a strong aura of death and constantly spread outwards. Outside the black ball of light, a green aura filled the air. Many plants that came in contact with this green aura withered. Not good, we have to dodge, be careful not to be sucked in. The elves all dodged. They hugged trees, rocks, and anything that could be held tightly. Even so, some of the huge trees and rocks were also swept into the air and constantly circled in the air. Corbett was dumbfounded. Is this the power of divine power? It's terrifying. Ah! I can't accept this. I can't accept this. In the center of the black ball of light, Keith's roar could be heard. He glared at the black-haired young man in the air with resentment. Until the moment of his death, Keith still couldn't understand how this young man, who looked like a necromancer, could possess the divine power of death. He was clearly only 20 years old. Keith, who had transformed into a great demon, was completely swallowed by the black ball of light with resentment, unwillingness, and confusion. That huge, evil figure slowly disappeared. Not long after, the explosion finally stopped. Voila! Voila! The entire Lake Heart Island was in a mess. It had been destroyed beyond recognition. Huge rocks fell from the mountain, producing loud noises. It's over. It's finally over. Ron took a deep breath and murmured. His body slowly descended from the sky. Although he no longer had a trace of death divine power, he felt that it was worth it to save the elven race and end the terrifying war. We won. The elves cheered when they saw that the great demon had been defeated. Ron, Ron! As soon as Ron landed on the ground, several figures rushed toward Ron. Aurora cried and rushed into Ron's arms. Ron gently stroked Aurora's smooth back and comforted her softly. Don't cry, it's all over. It's all over. At this time, Undine limped over with Corbett's help. She smiled and said, Ron, what do you want me to say? Thank you for saving the elves. Ron smiled. Grandma, it's nothing. Anyone in my position would do the same. Not long after, more and more elves gathered around Ron. They looked at Ron with gratitude. At this time, Dobin and the others walked over. When they saw Ron, they were a little embarrassed. The elves boasted of being an excellent race, but when the elves were on the brink of extinction, it was an outsider who saved them. Dobin walked in front of Ron and bowed deeply. He looked ashamed. Brother Ron, when you came to the elves, not only did we not treat you well, We even locked you in prison. Who would have thought that you would forgive us and save the elves? Ron hurriedly interrupted him and smiled. Elder Dobin, there's no meaning in your words. The elves are a hospitable race. I'm happy every day here. How can you blame Keith's actions on the elves? Besides, I've never taken it to heart. Dobin nodded. Brother Ron, thank you for your understanding. Your efforts will be rewarded with the friendship of the elves. Ron's open-mindedness won the favor of many elves. There was a burst of warm applause. The elves were simple and honest. They knew who was their enemy and who was their friend. Dobin and a few elven elders discussed in low voices for a while. Dobin turned his head and said with a smile, I've just discussed with a few elders and reached a consensus. On behalf of the elders, I now announce that Brother Ron will be awarded the title of Hero. As a friend of the elves, you can freely enter and leave the elf forest. Ron was a little flustered. He blushed and said, How can this be? Great. The elves cheered. Aurora was so excited that she hugged Ron's face and kissed him. After being teased by Slya and the others, her face suddenly turned red. Ron stayed with the elves for 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, Ron brought Basara, Rainy, and Kay out of the elf forest. Knowing that Ron was preparing to leave, many elves spontaneously sent Ron off. Ron, have you really decided to leave? Slya's eyes were red and full of reluctance. At this moment, she was already wearing the Elven Queen's attire. After her mother abdicated, Slya took over the Elven Queen's scepter. Ron nodded. I've already decided. Slya's eyes were full of sadness. She nodded and said in a hoarse voice, Come back more often when you're free. After saying that, she started sobbing softly. Dobin and a group of elven elders also came to send Ron off. In the current Elder Council, Dobin was the Great Elder. Wes had regained his status as an elder. The Blood Elf warlock Marlowe, who was once an elder of the Blood Elves, had also regained his position as an elder. Ron, stay. Before Ron left, Undine persuaded. The Council's order to kill you has not been lifted yet. You have also lost the last of your death god power. If you stay, I can protect your safety. When the next council convenes, I will think of a way to lift the order to kill you. At least, you should stay until the next council convenes. Ron smiled and refused. Grandma Undine, there's no need. I have enough power to protect myself now. At least, the elites of the sacred domain can't kill me. Don't worry. The space bags and weapons confiscated by the Blood Elves were also returned to Ron and the others. With the spirit corpse Mana Blue, even if he encountered an elite of the sacred domain, he might still be able to put up a fight. In addition, Ron had a more important reason for leaving. He wanted to find out the truth behind the destruction of the Scourge Church 100,000 years ago. According to Grandpa Homelin, his strength had reached the master rank. Moreover, he had the spirit corpse of an elite of the sacred domain to maintain him. It was enough for him to find out the truth. However, all of this could not be achieved by staying in the Elven Forest. After knowing Ron's strength, Undine did not force him. She nodded and looked at Aurora beside her and sighed softly. Ron. Aurora's eyes were red as if she had just cried. Ron smiled and kissed her. I'm leaving. Aurora, take care. Everyone, take care. Ron waved his hand coolly and pulled Basara to bid farewell to everyone. Then, he brought Basara, Rainy, and Kay and disappeared into the forest. Looking at Ron's back, Aurora's tears blurred her eyes. Ron loved Shea, Basara, and every other girl so deeply. Aurora could not accept the elves' way of thinking. Grandma Undine, what should I do? Aurora bit her lips and said, tears falling silently. Undine sighed and patted her head lovingly. Child, if you truly love someone, there are some things you can only accept and compromise. Otherwise, you will be like me and Grandpa. If not for this, we will regret it for the rest of our lives until the day we die, Aurora nodded. She raised her teary eyes and said softly, I know. I will work hard to learn to accept them, At this time, Shea smiled and said, "Okay, I'm leaving too. Everyone, take care." As she said that, she glanced at Corbett and smiled. "Grandpa, Grandma, you have to take care too." Aurora was shocked and turned around. "Why, Sister Shea? Are you leaving too?" Shea smiled and reached out to tap Aurora's forehead. "Don't worry. I'm not leaving to chase after him." Aurora saw that her sister had seen through her and smiled embarrassedly. "Sister, why are you leaving? Why don't you stay in the elf forest?" "What can I do in the elf forest?" Shea smiled and said, "I'm leaving to pursue my dream. When I was in school, I swore to become an outstanding mercenary. Until now I have been working hard for this dream." "An outstanding mercenary?" Aurora murmured. At this moment, she felt that she couldn't find the direction to move forward. Ron wanted to explore the truth of necromancy magic. Sister Shea wanted to pursue her dream. Each of them were moving forward bravely for their own goals. What was her purpose in staying in the elf forest? "I'm leaving. Sister, take good care of yourself." Shea reached out and hugged Aurora. He gently kissed her forehead and turned around to leave with large strides. Looking at Shea's departing figure and feeling the warmth on her forehead, Aurora couldn't help but fall into a daze. In the gloomy sky, thunder and lightning flashed wildly. On the ground, the red soil was filled with a demonic smell. A castle that was bigger than the entire city stood tall on a high mountain. Lightning struck down as if it would hit the tall castle at any time. In front of the castle there was a huge head. The huge head had many horns, from the chin to the ears. The horns were different in length. Among them, there was a pair of huge horns that were like two sharp swords, piercing the sky. This was hell. In the castle's hall, more than 10 people of different races were gathered together. They looked similar to Keith and the others. They all had horns on their heads, and their skin was a demonic dark red. Behind them, there was a long tail. They looked exactly like the demons described in the Noah Continent novels. They were the demons from Hell. Hell was Keith and the others' homeland. "Lord Thor, are you all right?" a demon asked with concern. Thor had called them for a meeting, but he had suddenly spat out blood. They didn't understand why. "I'm fine." Thor waved his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. His face was gloomy. "I'm fine. But just now, my soul clone in the Noah Continent was destroyed." "A soul clone in the Noah Continent?" That demon was shocked. "You're saying that Keith and the others failed their mission?" Thor nodded. "That's right. I can feel that his aura has already disappeared. He even used my power in the end. Unfortunately, he still failed." That demon was slightly shocked. "Lord Thor, Keith has already become a demigod after fusing with your power. Could it be that the Noah Continent also has demigods?" Thor said, "The Noah Continent definitely has demigods, but there aren't many of them." He paused. "However, the one who destroyed my soul clone wasn't a demigod, but a guy with divine power." "What? Divine power?" All the demons were shocked. "Isn't the Noah Continent a low-level plane? They don't just have God-realm experts? They also have gods?" "Gods." In the low-level planes, this was a supreme title. Ordinary low-level planes couldn't produce gods. Even in the main plane, gods were very powerful existences. The so-called demigods couldn't be compared to gods. Thor shook his head. "According to the information I've received, there are no gods in the Noah Continent, but we can't rule out the existence of gods." He paused. "The one who killed my soul clone seems to be the divine power of death from the main plane of the undead. Investigate for me. When did the undead reach so far?" "Undead?" That demon thought for a while and shook his head like a rattledrum. "I don't think so. The undead are now fighting with the Guangming gods in the main plane of order. The war is very fierce now. I don't think they have time to do anything else." Thor's face was gloomy and he didn't speak. At this time, another demon said, "Lord Thor, if Keith is dead, Our plan to reclaim the Noah continent at the lowest cost should be impossible. I think the army should make plans early, Thor smiled sinisterly. It's okay. As long as our army takes back the troops on the Eastern Front, reclaiming the Noah continent shouldn't be a problem. Although he said this, Thor also knew that their army was under great military pressure on the Eastern Front. We can only wait for the war on the Eastern Front to end. The first demon sighed. With their army strength, there was no need to set their eyes on the small Noah continent. However, they came to the Noah continent for another purpose. At this time, another demon said, Lord Thor, there's still no news from the army commander? No. Lord Thor shook his head. I can basically confirm that the army commander is in the Noah continent, but I don't know where he is. That's right. The demon nodded and said proudly. As soon as the war on the Eastern Front ends, we will immediately start an expedition and take the entire Noah continent. The army will win. The army will win. Many demons raised their hands and shouted loudly. Their faces were hot, and their morale was at the peak. As a fighting race, their eyes were full of fierce and cruel light. Saul raised his head and looked at the sky with cold eyes. If I find out who killed my soul avatar with the divine power of death, I will make him beg for death. Saul's canine teeth glowed as he looked at the sky with cold eyes. If I find out who killed my soul avatar with the divine power of death, I will make him beg for death. Chapter 435. Wind Chime Town. This was not an important place, and it did not produce any resources. Hence, even mercenaries rarely passed by this place. It was a relatively peaceful town. Grain-webbed due to poverty, there were no taxes. Even the tax collectors in the city would not come to this barren place. The lives of the townspeople were very peaceful. The spring sun was bright and beautiful here, and the birds were singing and the flowers were fragrant. It was like a world of peach gardens. After leaving the fairy forest, Ron and the rest arrived at this place called Wind Chime Town. When they arrived, it was already afternoon. Since there weren't many outsiders, there weren't any hotels here. However, this wasn't a problem for Ron and the others. They knocked on the door of a townsman's house. After some bargaining, they rented a few rooms on the second floor at an extremely cheap price. It's been hard on you for the past few days. Let's rest here for a few days, Ron said to Basara and the rest as he walked upstairs. Rainey replied with an "oh." Basara smiled and reached out to hold Ron's arm, snuggling into his embrace with a blissful look on her face. Kay followed Basara upstairs. Perhaps it was because of his growth period that his body became thicker and taller. He had followed Ron out of the fairy forest for a year. His originally tiny body had grown to a head taller than Ron. Beaumont's true form gradually emerged from his body. The owner of this house was a plump auntie called Ruth. Ron called her Aunt Ruth. Ruth was a very common name. There were a few people named Ruth in the same town. Aunt Ruth smiled all day, but this was just her appearance. Aunt Ruth was very good at scolding people. When Ron saw her, she was scolding her husband, a middle-aged man who was as thin as a bamboo pole. Ron was attracted by her voice and successfully rented this place. Compared to her cowardly husband, Aunt Ruth's slender eyes were full of shrewdness. However, she was very warm towards Basara and Rainey. In the room, Ron gently squeezed Basara's soft hand and sighed softly. In this year, following Ron everywhere, Basara's originally white and tender hands had become extremely rough. Her smooth dancing feet were also full of calluses. Seeing all this, Ron's heart ached. In this year of traveling in the Noah continent, Ron had changed a lot. Even though he was only 20 years old, there was no trace of childishness on his face. Instead, there was a sharp and determined look. He had short black hair and a small mustache on his chin that had not been shaved for a long time, and looked like he had been through the vicissitudes of life. Basara's small hand was held by Ron. Even though they were already an open couple, she was still very embarrassed. She blushed and wanted to pull her hand back, but Ron held it tightly. She tried to pull her hand back a few times, but she could not. Ron smiled. Basara, it's been hard on you to follow me everywhere this year. Basara reached out and touched the stubble on Ron's chin. Her eyes were full of affection. This is nothing. I used to run around in the gypsy troupe. Besides, as long as I follow you, I'm willing to go anywhere. It's been hard on you. Ron's heart was touched. He used a little strength in his hand, and Basara's delicate body fell into Ron's arms. The two of them looked at each other lovingly, their moist lips inching closer. Following a moan from Basara, Ron's hand had already reached into her clothes. Knock, knock, knock. At that moment, there was a hurried knock on the door. Rainie's voice came from outside the door. Sister Basara, Brother Ron, it's time to eat. After saying that, she ran away. Behind the door, Basara's soft breasts were half exposed, revealing the spring scenery inside. Her face was flushed, and her breath smelled like orchids. She looked at Ron coquettishly and said in a voice as soft as a mosquito's, "They want to eat." Ron had no choice but to get up from Basara's body, wash his face, and bring Basara downstairs. In the living room downstairs, Rainie and Kay had already started eating. The dinner here was simpler, just like the food of the commoners: black bread. There were some unknown sauces and some vegetables on the table. They looked like they had grown them themselves and were very fresh. When Ron and Basara came downstairs, Basara's face was still red from the lingering passion. It was very alluring. Aunt Ruth's skinny husband stared straight at her. It was no wonder. How could he see such a beautiful woman in a small town like this? When Basara saw Aunt Ruth's husband's drooling expression, a trace of displeasure appeared on her face. She leaned closer to Ron. Ouch! At that moment, Aunt Ruth's husband screamed like a pig being slaughtered. However, the burly Aunt Ruth pinched his ear with one hand and fiercely dragged him out. Bang! She slammed the door shut. Not long after, the skinny man's wailing could be heard from outside the door. Everyone in the house laughed knowingly. "Let's eat," Basara said with a red face. She reached out and took a piece of black bread. She skillfully smeared the sauces on it and handed it to Ron. She said apologetically, "There's nothing good to eat here. This is all I have." "It's good enough to have this," Ron said with a smile. "When I was young, I wanted to eat this but couldn't. I could only take some leftovers." As he said that, he took a big bite of the black bread. The four of them were used to hard times. Needless to say, Ron and Rainie were both homeless children. Basara was a dancer. She followed the singing and dancing troupe everywhere. Sometimes, when the troupe's income wasn't good, they couldn't even eat. Kay was better when she was young. However, after she followed Basara, she also led a homeless life. As Rainie ate, she raised her head and asked, "Brother Luoen, where are we going next?" In the past year or so, Ron and the rest had been searching for traces of the Scourge Church. They had practically traversed the entire Noah continent, looking for people who knew about it and looking for ancient documents in various libraries. However, until now they hadn't found anything. "It's not confirmed yet. Let's walk around and take a look," Ron said after thinking for a while. Kay said, "After passing this town and going over a mountain, we'll reach the kingdom of magical beasts. Brother Ron, shall we go take a look at the kingdom of magical beasts?" Kingdom of magical beasts? Ron frowned. The Noah continent was too big. In the past year or so, he had been wandering around the human and orc empires in the Noah continent. He hadn't been to the kingdom of magical beasts. "Let's go take a look then." Ron nodded. "Anyway, there hasn't been much news in the human world for the past year. It's good to go take a look at the kingdom of magical beasts." "Okay." Basara smiled and said, "Kay, in this case you can go home and take a look too, I'm not going back." Upon hearing that, Kay's face darkened. She raised her voice, giving everyone a shock. Seeing everyone looking at her in shock, Kay lowered her head and said softly, "I'm sorry for scaring everyone. But I just don't want to go back. If you don't want to go back, then don't go back. The way they treated you in the past was too much. Rainey comforted her. Indeed, Kay was now a gold Beaumont. If she returned to the Beaumont clan with the strength of the sacred domain that could defeat Omega, she would naturally not be looked down upon like before. No one could bully her. However, Kay just didn't want to go back. She didn't want to see those Beaumont faces. Becerra sighed softly. No matter what, the Beaumont clan was Kay's home. However, if Kay didn't want to go back, she wouldn't force her. Ron tilted his head and seemed to be thinking about something. Compared to Kay, he was thinking more. After a while, he asked, Kay, your kingdom of magical beasts, what exactly is it like? Kingdom of magical beasts? Kay smiled and thought for a while before saying, Kingdom of magical beasts isn't really an empire. It's more like a gathering of various tribes. There's no unified government or army. Various powerful tribes control many small kingdoms, but these small kingdoms are not unified. Kay paused and drank a mouthful of water. Right now, the kingdom of magical beasts is nominally the Lion King of the poisonous Manticore clan. However, in reality, the real ruler of the kingdom of magical beasts is the dragons. Dragons? Ron was a little surprised. The kingdom of magical beasts was different from what he had imagined. Yes, dragons. Kay nodded. Although our Beaumont clan is also very powerful and is known to the outside world as a high-level magical beast clan that is on par with the dragons, in reality, the strength of our Beaumont clan can't be compared to the dragons at all. We only have 1 seat in the Senate, but the dragons have 2 seats. Furthermore, their positions are also very high. They are the Speaker and Deputy Speaker. Rainey thought for a while and said, Then, the Elf clan is also very powerful. They now have 3 God Realm experts. Kay smiled. This is different. In reality, the only God Realm expert in the Elf clan is Granny Undine. Although the other 2 have God Realm abilities, they can't participate in the Senate. However, the dragons, Kay paused for a while. On the surface, they only have 2 God Realm experts, but in reality, it's more than that. I don't believe that an outstanding clan like the dragons only have 2 God Realm experts. Throughout history, many powerful dragons have lived in seclusion. That's why no one knows the true strength of the dragons. I see. After Kay's explanation, Ron finally understood the true face of the kingdom of magical beasts. Although all the magical beast clans were very powerful, only the dragons were truly superior. Although they didn't participate in the management of the kingdom of magical beasts' affairs, their influence had seeped into every corner of the kingdom of magical beasts. Ron thought for a while and asked, Oh right. Which clan has the most population in the kingdom of magical beasts? Kay glanced at Ron and smiled. It's the humans, ah. Ron was stunned. It was late at night. Ron sat cross-legged on his bed and entered a state of cultivation. After more than a year of experience, Ron had finally broken through from a beginner Grand Magus Necromancer to an intermediate Grand Magus Necromancer. At the same time, he could learn new necromancy spells, Skeleton Domination and Plague. Skeleton Domination and Plague were both very powerful necromancy spells. These 2 spells were targeted at undead creatures and strengthened their strength. Skeleton Domination increased the attack power, defense, speed, and other attributes of skeleton warriors, skeleton mages, and skeleton mages. Plague was a supplementary attack similar to spreading disease. The summoned undead creatures would carry this plague. When the enemy's wounds were infected with the plague's poison, they would become weak. In serious cases, they would even faint. These 2 necromancy spells played an important role in a necromancer's actual combat. In fact, necromancy spells would become very powerful once one reached the Grand Magus level. There wasn't a single necromancy spell that was useless. Ron closed his eyes and gradually entered a state of cultivation. Chapter 436. She also said that a beautiful girl like me should be careful and close the doors and windows at night to prevent ghosts from coming in. Basara patted her ample chest. This is too scary. You believe that? Ron said with a smile. Ghosts are souls. Don't forget, I specialize in the study of souls. Why don't I catch it? Ron smiled. If what Aunt Ruth said is true, this ghost should be a powerful professional. Perhaps it's a thief or something like that. They've never seen a thief before. Maybe it's not surprising that they're mistaken. Basara smiled and stuck out her tongue. So it's a thief. Ron, hearing you say that, I'm relieved. Ron looked at Basara, his dark eyes flashing with a trace of passion. Basara, don't leave tonight. Sleep here. Basara's face turned red. Her head almost reached her neck. She whispered shyly, okay. Her voice was so soft that it was almost inaudible. Grainweb. Night fell. The bright moon shone on the ground, and the ground was covered in a layer of silver. The night wind blew, and the old windows creaked. Nobody knew when it started, but the moon slowly hid behind the clouds. The ground became pitch black, and one couldn't even see their own fingers. At this time, a small voice came from the roof. It was very soft, but Ron still heard it. He suddenly opened his eyes. Someone's coming. At this time, a dark shadow landed on the roof of Ron's house. It gently lifted the roof tiles and looked outside. Ron simply closed his eyes and pretended to be asleep. Through the corner of his eyes, he saw a pair of dark brown eyes on the roof. The owner of these eyes was staring at Basara, who was next to him, with a perverted look in his eyes. The person on the roof looked carefully for a while, then gently covered the roof tiles. Ron thought to himself, this person looks like a thief. Is he here to steal something? But why did he leave again? Ron's gaze fell on the several spatial bags on the table. If a thief were to visit this place, he would definitely target these items. The thief hadn't actually left. Just as Ron's imagination was running wild, the window gently opened. A black shadow pushed open the window and tiptoed in. This shadow's footsteps were very light, and it looked like his movements were quite professional. He was indeed a thief. As soon as he entered, he used the thief class's invisibility skill. Only a vague silhouette could be seen, but in the darkness, it was already very well hidden. The bandit didn't even look at the portal bag on the table. Instead, he walked straight to the bed. With a slight movement of his hand, a shiny Book 56 monster appeared out of nowhere. He seems to be able to achieve complete invisibility, leaving no trace behind. What? Completely invisible? Kay's eyes widened in surprise. It's you. Look. Ron pointed at the grass and saw that something seemed to have streaked across the grass. However, there was not a single person on it. At this time, Basara, Rainey, Aunt Ruth, and the rest walked out of the house. Aunt Ruth, why did you come out? Basara saw Ruth come out and greeted her. Aunt Ruth's teeth were chattering, and her eyes were filled with fear. That spirit, what? That's the spirit? Basara, Rainey, and Kay heard and were shocked. Kay took a look and sucked in a breath of cold air. Tonight's events were extremely strange. He reached out and pointed. It's over there. Quick, chase it. After he finished speaking, he immediately rose and chased in the direction that the spirit escaped. Ron didn't stay idle either. His body disappeared from the spot. That's right. It's a spirit. It must be. After Ron and Kay chased after it, Ruth's husband, who was as thin as a bamboo pole, said in a trembling voice, Our things flew away for no reason, and the missing girl's in town. This is all the work of that spirit. Basara smiled and said, Aunt Ruth, you've misunderstood. This isn't a spirit. He's just a bandit. Aunt Ruth and her husband shook their heads in disbelief. They didn't see any bandit who could make things fly away. The spirit ran away quickly. As a bandit, his speed wasn't slow at all. At that moment, his heart was filled with regret. If he had known that the guy was so powerful, he would have been more careful. With such strength and reflexes, there was no doubt that the guy was a strong martial artist. The spirit saw Basara when he was spying on the roof. He was instantly mesmerized by Basara's natural beauty. However, when he saw Ron sleeping beside her, he hesitated. Finally, his lust took over. He decided to kill Ron and kidnap Basara. The spirit had let his guard down a little tonight. If he had been more careful, with his ability to be completely invisible, Ron probably wouldn't have found him so easily. There. Kay's speed was very fast. As a strong martial artist from the sacred domain, he had a better vision in the air. He discovered the spirit's tracks and quickly attacked in the air. Boom! A cloud of dust rose around the ghost, and the force of the collision spread out in all directions. The powerful impact caused the ghost to fall to the ground with a few knots. Due to the darkness and the spirit's superior ability to be invisible, Kay's punch was only a rough estimate. He didn't hurt the spirit. The spirit struggled a few times before fleeing in another direction. At this time, Ron had already arrived. He chanted an incantation, and a row of heavily armored skeleton warriors crawled up from the ground and blocked the spirit's path. After Ron used skeleton control, these skeleton warriors were much stronger than before. Their bodies were a head taller and stronger than before. They stood there like giants, holding huge double-edged axes in their hands. Their eyes flashed with a faint green light as they howled and walked step by step towards the ghost. Not long after, they had completely surrounded the spirit. "You can't run anymore. Surrender." Ron's figure slowly appeared on the ground, his deep voice echoing in the night sky. Seeing these skeletons, the spirit's face was filled with horror. He knelt down with a plop. I surrender. Please don't kill me." Chapter 437. Ron felt a little strange. He didn't expect that this ghost would surrender as soon as he saw him. In fact, Ron didn't see where this guy was. He only saw a vague shadow. He snorted, "Come out! I'll come out! I'll come out!" The voice of the ghost trembled. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure slowly emerged. Ron took a closer look. In front of him was a middle-aged man with a very wretched appearance. He had gray hair and a short and thin body. His lips were trembling and his eyes were full of horror as if he was frightened by something. He said in a hoarse voice, "I surrender. Don't kill me." Kay landed from the sky, looked at the strange man and asked, "Is this the guy? Are you the ghost?" "I'm not a ghost." At this time, the guy came to his senses. The fear in his eyes faded a little and he began to deny it. Kai was enraged when he heard that. He slapped him. "Motherf***, you don't look like a good person, sneaking into our room in the middle of the night. If you're not a spirit, then who is?" Kay was very strong. The guy was stunned by her slap. His ears were buzzing, but he still argued, I'm really not. You're still saying you're not?" Kay slapped him before he finished listening. She shouted, "Say it again if you dare. I'm a ghost, I'm a ghost." At this time, the wretched middle-aged man couldn't stand Kay's slap. His face was swollen and he had to admit it. He was just a small thief, not even a killer. He couldn't resist Kay's thick palm. "That's more like it." Seeing that the man began to cooperate, Kay's face eased. Ron couldn't help but admire him. It seemed that evil people needed evil people to deal with evil people. At this time, Kay asked, "Brother Ron, what do you want to ask this guy?" The wretched middle-aged man glanced at Ron. Only then did he realize that the thin and weak youth was the real boss. Ron asked, "Why did you enter my room?" I just wanted to steal something." The wretched man replied, but his eyes flickered. Obviously, he wasn't telling the truth. "You're lying." Ron coldly snorted, "My things are on the table. You want to steal things with a knife? I'll ask you again, why did you enter my room late at night?" I Seeing Kay's hand was raised again, the middle-aged man was scared. Looking at him. I'll talk. I'll talk. The wretched middle-aged man finally gave in. He helplessly said, Actually, I saw the woman sleeping next to you. I wanted to kill you first and then, before the man could finish his words, Kay jumped up as if she had been stabbed in the butt by a needle. Pa! She slapped the man, making him see stars. Kay stared at him and cursed, You motherf asterisk cur, that's my sister. You dare to do something to my sister, I'll kill you. Kay was furious. She raised her fist and slammed it down. Ron was quick-witted and stopped him. Don't be in such a hurry. I'll ask again. Ron looked up and down at the wretched middle-aged man and asked, When you were about to assassinate me, you even completely hid your aura. This is something that even assassins and elite assassins can't do. You're just a thief. How did you do it? This. The middle-aged man hesitated. His eyes flickered. This was related to the biggest secret in his heart. Speak. Seeing that the middle-aged man was dishonest, Kay stared at him and waved her hand to hit him again. I'll talk. I'll talk. The middle-aged man was so scared that he fell to the ground and covered his face with his hands. Ron couldn't help but laugh. This guy would only be honest if he wanted to make a move. With a bitter face, the middle-aged man carefully took off something like a cloak from his body and handed it to Ron. What is this? Ron took it and curiously asked. In his hand was a short piece of black cloth. Except for its strange shape, there didn't seem to be anything strange about it. This is the shadow cloak. I got it by chance. If you wear it, you can become completely invisible. However, it doesn't have much effect during the day. It can only be used at night. The middle-aged man helplessly replied. Ron tried to wear the shadow cloak and his body slowly disappeared. After a while, he completely disappeared. Amazing! Kay was flabbergasted. Big brother Ron, I can't see you at all now. Really? At this time, Ron's voice came. This voice seemed to come from the air. Ron gently took off the shadow cloak and his body appeared again. It's true. Kay smiled and nodded. I couldn't see you at all just now. This is really a good thing. Ron smiled with satisfaction. Ron looked at the shadow cloak in his hand lovingly. Suddenly, his expression froze. Inside this shadow cloak, there was a strange pattern embroidered. He wouldn't forget this pattern even if he turned into ashes. It was a bright red skull pattern. The skull's ferocious face and ferocious expression were unreservedly displayed. This is... Ron's lips trembled and his hands couldn't help but tremble. No. He wasn't mistaken. This was the blood-red skull flag that Ron saw in his dream. This was definitely the symbol of the Scourge Church. Big brother Ron, what's wrong? Kay saw that something was wrong with Ron and asked. Suddenly, Ron stretched out his hand like an angry lion and grabbed the middle-aged man's collar. He roared, Speak. You tell me. Where did you get this thing? This. The sudden change caught the middle-aged man off guard. He was frightened and couldn't speak for a long time. Speak quickly or I'll kill you. Ron glared with bloodshot eyes, his body emitting a murderous aura. It had been a whole year. In order to find traces of the Scourge Church, Ron's footprints almost covered the entire Noah continent. However, he didn't find any clues. How could he not lose his composure when he suddenly saw it here? Big brother Ron, don't worry, he'll die like this. Kay saw that Ron had lost his composure and was somewhat stunned. He immediately separated the two. The middle-aged man was pushed away and sat on the ground, coughing. Ron took a few deep breaths and took the opportunity to calm down. Only then did he stare at the middle-aged man's yellow novel. He said coldly, Speak. Where did you find this thing? The middle-aged man's eyes were a little frightened. He hesitated for a moment. I'm afraid you won't be able to find it even if I tell you. Speak quickly. Kay and Ron shouted in unison. The middle-aged man trembled. I'll say. I found this thing in the city of zombies. City of zombies? Ron was greatly surprised. He thought for a moment and was sure that he had never heard of the name of the city. He turned to Kay and asked, Kay, is there a city with this name in the kingdom of magical beasts? Kay shook her head blankly. Both of them looked at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man hurriedly said, Of course you haven't heard of it. This city of zombies is not in the Noah continent, but in another plane. Moreover, this city of zombies is also a name in the mercenary world. Whether the abandoned city is called this name or not, we don't know. After the middle-aged man's explanation, Ron and Kay finally understood the whole story. The city of zombies, as the name suggested, was filled with countless terrifying corpses. These corpses could actually move and take the initiative to attack people. These living corpses were extremely powerful. Some of them even had the strength of a master. These corpses were already dead. In battle, there was no concept of death at all. Coupled with the terrifying number of corpses, it was called a forbidden area in another plane. The most frightening thing was that when mercenaries died, they would turn into living corpses and attack their companions. Just a few months ago, the middle-aged man followed a mercenary group into the city of zombies. The mercenary group suffered heavy casualties. The middle-aged man and a few of his teammates relied on excellent luck to escape from the city of zombies, and this experience became a nightmare that the middle-aged man could not get rid of. Although the city of zombies was dangerous, there were many top-grade equipment and weapons in it. There were even people who found black crystal coins in the city of zombies. This news spread and attracted countless adventurers. The shadow cloak in the middle-aged man's hand also came from there. After escaping from the city of zombies with great difficulty, the middle-aged man took advantage of his teammates' unpreparedness and used the thief's magic to steal the shadow cloak and escape. Afraid that the mercenaries would come looking for him, he had been hiding in this remote town, waiting for the limelight to blow over before showing himself. Another plane. Ron took a deep breath. He recalled that the soul-devouring beast once said that the other plane was actually the continent of Omlos from 100,000 years ago. Although the soul-devouring beast's words had yet to be verified, Ron was still willing to believe it. In the past year, Ron had entered the other plane several times. However, the other plane was just too big, and there were too many exotic beasts in it. In the end, Ron searched aimlessly in the other plane and found nothing. After hearing the whole story, Kay and Ron looked at each other. Kay asked, Big Brother Ron, this city of zombies, could it be? It shouldn't be wrong. Ron said in a deep voice. He turned his head and stared coldly at the middle-aged man. He snorted coldly and said, Then tell me, where in this other plane is this city of zombies? The middle-aged man looked into Ron's eyes and felt an inexplicable sense of fear. He thought for a moment and said, To be honest, I don't know exactly where it is. The other plane is just too big. Even if I give you a map, you won't be able to find it. Kay shouted when she heard this. Cut the crap. Whether or not we can find it is our business. You better give us the map. The middle-aged man shook his head. The map is not with me. Chapter 438. Date, November 22 and D. Catch him. Don't let him escape. Ultimate Hell Evolution. Just as they were talking, there was a commotion not far away. The flashing torches were especially eye-catching in the night. Book from Book River, hearing that Ron and the others had caught the ghost, the townsfolk of Winchim Town rushed over with weapons and torches in their hands. It's him. The leader was Ruth. She rushed over angrily the moment she saw the middle-aged man. Not long after, the townsfolk of Winchim Town surrounded him. With the help of the torches, Ruth finally saw the man clearly. She was shocked. John, it's you? The man named John tried his best to cover his face, but he couldn't. He was immediately recognized by the townsfolk of Winchim Town. So you're the ghost. You were the one who kidnapped those young girls. Kill him. The angry townsfolk roared and grabbed John by the collar. Among them was Ruth. Her 17-year-old daughter had also disappeared one day. After some explanation, Ron found out that the man named John was originally a townsfolk. When he was young, he went out to be a mercenary and only returned recently. After returning to his hometown, he became restless and extended his evil claws to the young girls who lived in the same town as him. Using the high speed of a thief and the help of the shadow cloak, John was like a fish in water in Winchim Town. He snuck into the townsfolk's homes, kidnapped the young girls, and locked them in the dungeon to have sex with them day and night. No one discovered his first crime. After tasting the sweetness of success, John became even bolder. He wandered around aimlessly all day, eyeing the beautiful girls in Winchim Town. At night, he began to commit crimes. The continuous disappearance of the young girls caused the townsfolk to be fearful. Many people began to move away. Hearing Hardedef's words, everyone's anger was out of control. Kay stepped forward and grabbed Hardedef's collar, pulling him up as he said fiercely, "Tell me, where are the young girls?" I locked them all in the basement." John's whole body trembled as he answered weakly, "Quick! Bring us to them." The townspeople were shouting, and someone took out a rope and tied John up. Because Kay was watching, John could not resist. He could only be tied up tightly by the ordinary townsfolk, who were not even professionals, and escorted back to Winchim Town like a criminal. The townspeople escorted John back to his home and opened the dungeon. Finally, they rescued the girls who had been trapped for many days. Those girls were naked and their eyes were dull. As soon as they saw their parents, they ran to them and threw themselves into their arms, crying and wailing. Among them was Aunt Ruth's daughter, Lily. Seeing her daughter being tortured beyond recognition, Aunt Ruth burst into tears. Beside the dungeon, the corpses of 3 young girls were found. These girls had all been tortured to death by Hardedef. Upon seeing these mutilated corpses, the townsfolk's anger finally erupted. The victims' parents swung their hoes at John, who was tied up and unable to move. John fell to the ground without making a sound. Soon, the lecher in the town was smashed into meat paste by the angry townspeople with farming tools. Humph, he deserved to die. Seeing the lecherous behavior of this demon, even the usually good-tempered Becerra cursed fiercely. Ron, on the other hand, was smiling wryly. He'd wanted to ask where the City of the Living Dead was, as it was the only clue to finding the ruins of the Calamity Church. Unfortunately, these angry townspeople had ruined his plans. His heart was filled with regret. Looking at the shadow cloak in his hand, Ron smiled and handed it to Kay. "Kay, you caught him, so this belongs to you." "Hee, this is good stuff." "I don't want it." Kay shook her head like a rattledrum. "But this also belongs to your Scourge Church." "I can't take it. Besides, I don't read pornographic novels. I like sneaky battles." Ron hesitated for a moment and nodded. "All right, I'll take it." After being disturbed by the appearance of the spirit for half the night, Ron and the rest finally fell into a deep sleep. Early the next morning, they bade farewell to Aunt Ruth. After rescuing her daughter, Aunt Ruth was in a good mood. Her daughter, Lily, was a 17 or 18-year-old girl. She was hiding at the back of the room, secretly watching Ron. With one more person, the house became livelier. "You're leaving so soon?" Aunt Ruth was surprised. "You should at least stay for 2 more days. Yesterday, you rescued the missing girls from Windychime Town. Now, the townspeople are saying that they want to thank you." Although Aunt Ruth was fierce, that was only to her husband. In fact, she was quite a nice person. Becerra and Rainey liked her very much. "There's no need for that. We still have things to do." Ron smiled and refused. Seeing that Ron and the rest were determined to leave, Aunt Ruth knew that she couldn't persuade them to stay. However, she insisted on returning the money that Ron had given her for the night. Ron couldn't refuse, so he could only accept it. Ron and the rest left Windy Chime Town. Boom! A huge wave crashed onto the reef, causing a huge explosion. The wave rose up dozens of feet high. Read the full text of the rebirth of the political path. This is the sea. After leaving Windy Chime Town and crossing a few mountains, Ron and the rest arrived at the seaside. Seeing the magnificent sea and smelling the slightly salty sea breeze blowing from afar, Ron couldn't help but feel a surge of emotions. Brother Ron, after crossing this endless sea, we'll reach the kingdom of magical beasts, Kay said loudly. Her voice was a little soft because of the encyclopedic literature by the sea. How do we get there? Ron asked loudly. There's a harbor not far ahead. We can take a boat there. Once we reach the shore, we'll reach the kingdom of magical beasts. Ron nodded. Let's go. Ron and the others quickly arrived at the harbor. As soon as they arrived, they were stunned. In front of them was a huge wooden three-masted sailboat. It was 5 stories tall and was filled with a dense crowd. On the wide deck, the sailors were busy. The kingdom of magical beasts. The kingdom of magical beasts. Go buy your tickets here. The ship is about to depart. The ticket seller shouted. There was a long line in front of him. Countless people were squeezing their way up. There were a few orcs and magical beasts in their true forms in the crowd. Their goal was to go to the kingdom of magical beasts. 4 tickets, Ron said to the ticket seller as he squeezed his way to the ticket office with great difficulty with Kay and the others. 300 gold coins per person. The young human man glanced at Ron and said calmly. So expensive. Ron was slightly shocked. 300 gold coins per person. 4 people would be 1,200 gold coins. This ticket was extraordinarily expensive. You don't have to go if you think it's expensive. The ticket seller rolled his eyes at him, giving him a look that said, it's up to you whether you want to buy or not. Ron had no choice but to pay the price. He brought Kay, Becerra, and Rainey onto the huge 3-masted ship. High Priest Xiao Xiao read the full text of the online game. The huge cabin was packed with people. They were all humans. Other than some who were wearing mercenary uniforms, most of them were craftsmen and craftsmen. The kingdom of magical beasts had the largest land and the most abundant resources in the Noah continent. There were countless job opportunities there. A craftsman could earn 5 times more in a year in the kingdom of magical beasts. This attracted countless humans. Their eyes were filled with hope for their future. The cabin was hot and stuffy. There was a suffocating smell in the air. This was a cabin for commoners. It's too smelly here. Becerra frowned. Her small white hand covered her nose. Rainey said, we don't have any seats either. Ron looked around. His gaze landed on the stairs at the side. Let's go to the cabin on the 2nd floor. The environment there might be better. Will it be expensive there? Becerra was a little worried about the money. So be it. It's better than staying here, Ron said helplessly. Ron and the rest went through. When they were about to go upstairs, they were stopped by a bearded human crew member. Sir, you can't go up. Ron turned around in shock. Why? The bearded crew member said politely, I'm sorry, sir. It's full. You're lying. That crew member's lie was exposed by Rainey. I saw a few people go up just now. Why was it full when we went up? The bearded crew member smiled. He had no choice but to tell them the truth. All right, the cabins above the 2nd floor are not full. However, I want to tell you that those people just now were not humans. They were magical beasts that had transformed into humans. A look of displeasure flashed across Ron's face. He vaguely guessed something. He raised his eyebrows and said, So what? Nothing much. The bearded crew member changed into a smile. His smile was full of mockery. The cabins above the 2nd floor are specially for the use of the noble races. Magical beasts and orcs can go up. As for humans? Once Rainey heard that, she was furious. She retorted, so what if they're humans? Aren't you a human? Rainie's voice was very loud, and in a short while, she attracted everyone's attention. Those humans' gazes were filled with a hint of surprise as they read the full text of Shen Nung's evil life. Being scolded by a little girl, the bearded crew member's face turned ugly. He straightened his face. I don't want to say so much to you. Anyway, no means no. If you're unhappy, take the chance before the ship departs. Go down earlier, you. Rainie's face flushed red. She was so angry that she couldn't say a word. The ship belonged to someone else. It was her freedom to fall in love with him. Just thinking about it made her angry. Becerra immediately pulled Rainie, indicating for her not to be rash. Rainie rolled her eyes and turned to pull Kay over. This guy is a magical beast. He can go up, right? He's a magical beast. Looking at Kay, who was a head taller than him, the bearded crew member's eyes became serious. Please place your hand on this protruding, colorful stone. Kay did as she was told. Not long after, the colorful stone emitted a colorful glow. It really is a magical beast. Everyone was shocked. That colorful stone was a device that could detect a magical beast's true identity. That colorful glow happened to verify Kay's identity. She didn't need to transform to prove herself. Once the bearded crew member saw it, his attitude changed 180 degrees. He bowed deeply. So it's a magical beast. This way, please. There are plenty of rooms on the second floor, Rainie proudly said. I was right. He's a magical beast. If that's the case, we can go up, right? Before she could finish her sentence, she lifted her leg and was about to go up. However, the bearded man extended his hand to stop her. I'm sorry. Of course, a magical beast can go up. You guys can't. Rainie was stunned. Why? He's our friend. The bearded crew member shook his head. No, no. You humans will disturb other magical beasts. We have to think of other distinguished guests. Without a choice, Kay could only say, if that's the case, I won't go up. I'll stay here with you guys. What a killjoy. Rainie stomped her feet angrily and dashed out like a gust of wind. Kay had no choice but to catch up with her. TSK. You guys really think you're a high-class race? When they were leaving, Ron seemed to have heard this sentence. He frowned and turned back to look, but he didn't know who said it. Those humans were squeezed together like sardines, looking at him with a gloating expression. Ron's gaze swept across, and he was surprised to find that there were people with big splashes and great magicians among them. These distinguished occupations were like commoners, squeezed in the suffocating cabin. Even if they were wearing gorgeous clothes, they didn't have their usual elegant demeanor. Seeing this, Ron's heart trembled. He was worried about his future trip to the kingdom of magical beasts. That place was probably a world with a strict hierarchy. Let's set sail. Chapter 439. Date: November 22. Indiran and the rest came to the deck to take a breather and look at the vast sea. The sun shone warmly on their bodies, and the gentle sea breeze blew, making them feel exceptionally comfortable. Ultimate Hell Evolution. This book came from Book River. However, they knew that their happiness was short-lived. There were strong winds and waves on the deck, and there was even a storm at night. Sooner or later, they would have to return to the tight and suffocating cabin. The huge three-masted ship had 5 levels. The second to fourth levels were occupied by high-ranking races such as magical beasts and orcs. Only the first level was occupied by humans. Rainie could clearly see that there were many empty rooms on the top 4 levels. No one was staying on the top level, but unfortunately, they were not allowed to go up. So suffocating. Rainie was indignant. Why can the magical beasts stay on top, while we humans can only stay on the bottom? Even if we have money, they won't let us stay. This is so unfair. As she spoke, she glared fiercely at Kay. Needless to say, those words were directed at her. After being rejected by Big Beard, Rainey vented all her anger on Kay. Kay felt wronged. She thought to herself, I wasn't the one who set this unfair rule. Besides, didn't I come out with you? However, Kay knew that in the current situation, keeping her mouth shut was the best choice. Many humans also walked out of the cabin and came to the deck. Their eyebrows were dancing as they chatted loudly, their eyes full of glory and dreams. Some humans were even gambling, but Ron and the rest were not interested in them. The scenery on the sea was rather beautiful. In the distance, the sea and the blue sky merged together, and even their mood was lifted. However, once they thought about returning to the stinky cabin, they felt uncomfortable. Ron, Kai, and the others were sitting on the deck and talking. Suddenly there was a paw sound. Something fell on Xiao Yu's head, giving her a big fright. What? She let out a shriek. She reached out and touched her head. It was sticky, but it was the skin of a sweet berry. She didn't know who threw it on her head from upstairs. Who? Who did it? Kay was originally sitting on the deck. Once she saw it, she jumped up and shouted in exasperation, attracting the attention of the surrounding humans. It's them. Ron's gaze congealed, his eyes flashed with a trace of anger. He saw on the high railing more than 10 people who looked like humans were laughing wantonly, from time to time pointing at them. To be precise, they were all magical beasts in human form, but he didn't know which bastard threw the sweet berry peel. Brother Ron, the super biological empire. Rainey's face was disheveled. She felt so wrong that tears rolled down her cheeks. Ron's face was ashen. He strode forward and said loudly, Who threw the peel? Get down here. Ron's voice wasn't loud, but it was exceptionally powerful. It spread far and wide along with the wind. Not only were the magical beasts upstairs alarmed, almost everyone on the ship was alarmed. The humans on the deck were a little surprised. They were used to seeing magical beasts bullying humans, but they had never seen a human who dared to challenge a magical beast. The magical beasts on the 3rd floor were silent for a few seconds. Suddenly, they burst into arrogant laughter. The magical beasts surrounded a young man in the middle and laughed. Inubi really threw accurately. Just a random peel and those humans jumped up in anger. I say, you didn't do it on purpose, did you? Another magical beast at the side laughed. That group of magical beasts was the barbarian bull clan that was out traveling. They were taking a ship back to the kingdom of magical beasts. The person who threw the sweet berry peel was none other than that Inubi fellow. Even though he didn't do it on purpose, as a magical beast clan, they didn't care about low-class humans at all. The deck below was filled with humans. Even if it hit them, Inubi didn't think it was troublesome. The humans also didn't have the guts to find trouble with them. Hee, this has nothing to do with whether I did it on purpose or not. The young man called Inubi laughed. Did you hear that? They asked me to get down. Where did these low-class humans come from? How dare they ask us to get down? Are they tired of living? Are they mad? Ha ha. There was another burst of laughter on the 3rd floor. Even the magical beasts in the surrounding buildings laughed. It was just a fruit peel. So what if they threw it? They didn't think of humans as anything. Kay's eyes flashed with flames. She took a step forward but was pulled back by Ron. Let me do it, Ron said in a deep voice. There was a nameless flame in his heart that was about to explode. Kay understood Ron's feelings. She nodded calmly. She knew that Ron, who had the corpse of a sacred domain powerhouse, was not inferior to her. Ron walked past Kay and stepped below the ship. He said loudly, I'll say it again. Apologize to this lady. As soon as he said that, the humans on the deck gasped. Only then did they realize that this human was not joking. He was serious. However, there was a trace of doubt in their hearts. Did this person know that there were magical beasts living upstairs? Did you hear that? He actually asked us to apologize. Inubi, what do you think? A young man from the barbarian bull clan said with a smile. A low-class human like him actually has the guts to ask the noble barbarian bull clan to apologize? Ignore him. What is a human? Another barbarian said with a smile. Interesting, interesting. That young man from the barbarian bull clan called Inubi didn't seem to mind. He faintly smiled and said, "It seems like we can have some fun." Since he didn't accept my apology, then I'll spare him the trouble of going down. After saying that, he suddenly jumped down from the third floor and landed heavily on the deck, causing the deck to shake. The huge barbarian bulls were more than 2 meters tall in their human form. Their muscles were knotted and their bodies were full of power. It was intimidating. "There's a good show to watch," a barbarian said with a smile. "Hee, let's watch the show." The roaring priest of the online game. Inubi is really lonely. He's so serious about a human. It's completely necessary. Another barbarian said contemptuously. He did not agree with Inubi's actions. "You're wrong. It's necessary to teach a human who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth a lesson." Another barbarian said with a smile. Hee, it's a lonely journey anyway. Just treat it as a distraction. This human kid is really bold. Doesn't he know that there are magical beasts living here? A barbarian said with a smile. The barbarian bull clan's Inubi walked towards Ron in large strides. His heavy footsteps seemed to be stepping on people's hearts. The surrounding humans unconsciously opened up a path for him, their eyes filled with fear. They simply didn't dare to meet Inubi's gaze. "Is this kid looking for death?" a human whispered. "He actually dares to provoke magical beasts? Is he tired of living?" Another human gloated. "This kid is very young. I'm afraid he hasn't seen much of the world." A human elder shook his head and sighed. He looked at Ron with eyes full of pity. "Human kid, I heard that you want me to apologize to you?" The magical beast called Inubi walked in front of Ron and laughed loudly. "It's not me. It's this lady." Ron smiled faintly. He did not hide the hostility on his face. "You threw that thing at her just now." "Oh, is that so?" Inubi glanced at Rainey, and his eyes were filled with contempt. Suddenly, he laughed maniacally and hollered. "If that's the case, then accept it. This is my apology." After he finished speaking, his eyes flashed fiercely. He suddenly punched out, bringing a strong gust of wind towards Ron. Ron was already prepared. He also decided to teach this arrogant magical beast a lesson. With a thought, he summoned the bone shield, Shinong's evildoer's life. Boom! This earth-shattering fist caused the ship to slightly tremble. One could only imagine how powerful the barbarian bull tribe's brute force was. Ron held the bone shield in his hand and retreated a few steps back. A trace of heat was left on the bone shield. "Your reaction is not bad. Looks like you have some skills. Let's go again." Inubi did not care that his attack did not hit. He laughed sinisterly and walked towards Ron. "Haha, this Inubi guy is serious." A barbarian laughed. "Not bad. This kid actually blocked Inubi's punch. Looks like he's a human mercenary. He has some skills." Another barbarian said. "However, it's only a matter of time before that human kid fails. How can his body be compared to us magical beasts?" At this time, the ship's bow began to bustle. Some magical beasts of other races began to gather around. They held the mentality of watching a show and watched all this with interest. A human who offended a magical beast generally did not have a good ending. Ron looked at the burnt bone shield and sneered in his heart. "You're just a master-level guy with just you. Not enough for me to use all my strength." With a thought, Ron began to silently chant an incantation. After a while, a large number of skeleton warriors scrambled to climb out from the ground. "Huh? What's this?" A barbarian rubbed his eyes. "It looks like skeletons." Another barbarian said. "Why did he bring out skeletons?" The barbarian bulls had a question mark in their hearts. Pornographic novels. On the other hand, the human side was in an uproar. The Empire started an all-out war again. He's a bone slave. No way, a bone slave who can't even beat an ordinary human dares to challenge a magical beast? Is he really courting death? The surrounding humans whispered. Those who were not optimistic about Ron's chances were even more disappointed. If he was a human professional, then there would be some hope. At least he would be able to keep his life. However, he was a bone slave. There was no doubt that he would die. Some humans looked at Ron as if he was already a dead man. Ron breathed a sigh of relief. He thought that he could not summon skeletons on the ship. Seeing the rows of heavily armored skeleton warriors standing in front of him, he was finally relieved. What are these things? Inubi was somewhat surprised. He scratched his head. You're not planning to use these things to deal with me, are you? Ron did not speak. He used his actions to confirm Inubi's guess. At this time, the skeleton warriors seemed to have received an order. Their eyes glowed with a green light and they rushed towards Inubi. Die. Inubi's eyes flashed. He punched the nearest skeleton hero, his flaming fist smashing into the skeleton hero. At this time, the skeleton warrior lowered its body and went into a defensive posture. It placed its huge shield in front of its body and blocked Inubi's attack. What? Inubi was shocked. The rebound force from the other side was far beyond his expectations. At this time, the skeleton warrior's axe came towards Inubi. Chapter 440. Inubi was both shocked and angry. What the hell is this thing? Hard armor, strong attack power, and a tactic that only attacked and did not defend. All of these made up the skeleton warrior's pornographic novel. A strong foundation. Yaochi ebook. Inubi was forced to retreat under the skeleton warrior's attack. At this time, the skeleton warrior had already surrounded him, and the heavy bone axe in his hand kept hitting him. At this moment, he was covered in blood. Oh my God, is this still a bone slave? Are my eyes playing tricks on me? A human rubbed his eyes, which were full of disbelief. He was a craftsman from the lowest rung of society, and had come into contact with necromancers, who were also bone slaves. In his eyes, those bone slaves were just lowly existences. However, the scene in front of him overturned his view of the world. He saw those slow-moving and weak skeletons become extremely strong. Under the siege of these skeletons, the magical beast was forced to retreat. Roar! Under the heavy pressure of the opponent, Inubi finally changed into his original form. His original form was a huge bull that weighed a ton. His entire body was covered in a green, iron-like armor that shone brightly under the sun. Inubi roared, and the huge bull lowered his head and rammed into the skeleton warrior like an armored car. Ha! Inubi is finally serious. On the railing of the third floor, his companion, who was also from the barbarian bull clan, chuckled. This human really has some skill. He actually beat Inubi to the point of revealing his true form. A barbarian bull clansman beside him said. But he's not far from death. Another bull said with a smile. These people's eyes were full of anticipation. They were waiting to see the human get beaten to a pulp by Inubi. Basara could not help but worry. Ron, will he be okay? Kay, do you want to help him? Kay smiled slightly. Sis, don't worry. This bull's strength is not enough to trouble Big Brother Ron. Rainey said angrily, we must teach this guy a lesson. Did he transform? Facing the powerful bull, Ron sneered in his heart. He did not panic and casually cast a necromancy spell. Plague. A large amount of green gas erupted from the skeleton hero's body. This gas was extremely toxic, and as soon as it came into contact with a wound, it would seep into the enemy's bloodstream, causing them to feel dizzy and weak. After transforming into a bull, Inubi's strength had increased greatly. At this moment, His strength had increased from an 8th-rank magical beast to a 9th-rank magical beast, which corresponded to the high rank of a human. He was only one step away from entering the realm of a master. The barbarian bulls, with their powerful bodies and tough skin, had a great advantage in the beginning. Even the heavily armored skeleton hero was sent flying by the barbarian bulls. However, there were simply too many skeleton warriors. No matter how hard Inubi tried, he couldn't break out of their encirclement. Instead, the encirclement was shrinking. Damn it! What the hell are these guys? Why was he so difficult to deal with? It's as if I can't beat him down no matter what. At this moment, Inubi was surrounded by dozens of skeleton warriors. Countless axes were swinging at him, and it didn't take long for him to be covered in wounds. Coupled with the corrosion of the plague, he felt dizzy. Not good. This green gas is toxic. At this time, Inubi suddenly sobered up. He roared and lowered his head, using all his strength to rush out. War Trample! Relying on his powerful attack power, the skeleton warriors were either killed or injured, and some were sent flying. He finally managed to open a bloody path. After breaking out of the encirclement, Inubi's body was extremely weak. Corroded by the plague, he almost couldn't stand steadily. But in the next moment, something even more terrifying happened. The bone-like thing in the human's hand casually waved a few times, and those skeletons that had been sent flying stood up once more. They brandished huge shields and heavy axes, looking even more powerful. Inubi was both shocked and angry. As a magical beast of the 9th rank, he had never encountered such a strange human. He hadn't even made a move, but he was already at his limit. "Human, who the hell are you?" Inubi gasped for breath as he asked. Ron smiled. "Who I am is not important. What you should do now is to immediately apologize to that lady." "Don't even think about it." Inubi glared. If a noble bull like him had to apologize to a lowly human, he wouldn't be able to stay in the tribe. Heavens! Who the hell is this guy? What are those skeletons? How can they be so powerful? Inubi is clearly not a match. Let's go and help him. The barbarian bull clenched his teeth and said. At this time, they all jumped down from the floor and landed on the deck. At the same time, they all transformed. Not long after, more than 10 barbarian bulls stood in an orderly manner in front of Ron. In the highest cabin of the 3-masted ship, a magical beast in human form was quietly sitting on the bed. At this time, he suddenly opened his eyes. The person sitting on the bed was an old man with a head full of white hair. His bark-like face was covered with wrinkles. He was wearing a heavy armor and looked like a tall knight. He was tall and sturdy with a bare waist and a tiger back, which didn't match his age. At this time, another magical beast in human form pushed open the door and came in. He was a middle-aged man and was also the personal bodyguard of this old man. Omir, what happened outside? The tall and sturdy old man asked. Omir walked in and deeply bowed to the person on the bed. He looked very respectful. Sir, a human and a magical beast are fighting outside. The young man called Omir said. Magical beast? Human? The old man frowned. What kind of human has the courage to be so big? Don't they know that they have to abide by the rules set by the magical beast? The old man raised his voice. There was a trace of dissatisfaction in his voice. Sir, it seems that those fellows have offended that human. Omir's position was still fair and he explained the situation. The old man's frown deepened. Isn't this a small matter? Besides, with such a weak strength, we magical beast should consider it good that we didn't find trouble with him. What right does he have to make a move against us magical beast? The old man's tone was very displeased. His words were full of favoritism towards the magical beast. In his view, this was a world where the strong preyed on the weak. A weak race like the human race deserved to be bullied. The strong won everything and the weak had no dignity. This was the consensus of the magical beast. The middle-aged man's face was a little embarrassed. Sir, now it's that human who has defeated the magical beast. What? Defeated? A human actually defeated a magical beast? What kind of strength does he have? The old man was a little surprised. He thought for a moment and suddenly stood up. Let's go and see. At this time, there was a clatter on the deck. The heavy bodies of the barbaric bulls, including Inyabi, were sent flying and crashed heavily onto the deck. A tall knight was patrolling the area, holding a huge demonic curved sword in his hand. None of the barbaric bulls were a match for him. Even the armored barbaric bulls that had transformed into level 10 magical beasts were sent flying by his huge and heavy body. The Terror Knight was currently the strongest undead creature Ron could summon. Due to the increase in the power of Ron's soul, its strength had become even stronger. That's... The old man's eyes widened in disbelief. An undead creature? An undead creature? These skeletons are undead creatures? Omir was shocked. His gaze fell on the Terror Knight and he muttered, "This big guy's strength is not simple." The old man took a deep breath. "I know who that guy is. If I'm not wrong, he's the Ron that the council has issued a kill order." Ron? He's Ron, the human who practices evil undead magic? Omir was obviously shocked. Isn't he being hunted by the council? He actually has the guts to escape to the kingdom of Warcraft? Ha ha! The old man laughed. His gaze swept over Ron, carefully sizing him up. Does he look like he's fleeing? It's obvious that he's traveling. It seems that he doesn't care about the council's decision at all. The old man's mouth twitched a few times. I have to say that this kid is quite capable. The Holy See was chasing him, but he was lucky enough to escape. Later on, he fled to the Orc Empire, and was pursued by a sacred domain powerhouse of the Holy See, but was stopped by Li Jia. Omir was shocked. Li Jia? He actually intervened in this matter. He paused for a moment before continuing. Also, I received a letter from Undine. In the letter, she hopes that I can let this kid go. Omir took a deep breath. This human, who was regarded as a heretic by the council, was actually protected by Li Jia and Undine. Things were starting to get a little tricky. The old man nodded and smiled. That's why I said this kid is quite capable. Omir took a deep breath. My lord, what do you plan to do? Let him go just like that? Li Jia. Undine. The old man laughed coldly. If this was the territory of the orcs and elves, it wouldn't be good for me to fall out with them. But this is the territory of the kingdom of Warcraft. The old man laughed sinisterly. It's none of his business. Omir's expression became serious. My lord, do you plan to do it yourself? The old man nodded. Ron has the support of those two, and things have become a little complicated. Now it seems that only if I do it myself can I minimize the trouble in the future. To be able to talk to Li Jia and Undine as equals, the old man's identity was obvious. Only he, who was also a powerhouse of the divine realm, had the qualifications to challenge the other two powerhouses of the divine realm. As long as he did it himself, Li Jia and Undine would not be able to say anything in the territory of the Warcraft. Omir quietly watched the battle in the field, and at this time he could not help but say, My lord, he's just a human child. Even if his strength is a little strange, why do you have to lower yourself to do it yourself? You don't understand. Before Omir could finish, the old man had already interrupted him. He glanced at Omir and smiled. You also think that I'm chasing him to take revenge on Wharton, the powerhouse of the sacred domain who sided with me, right? Isn't that the case? Omir was a little stunned. Who does that guy think he is? The old man smiled coldly. That's because... Omir felt that his brain could not wrap itself around the situation. The old man quietly looked at Ron on the deck. That kid's identity and background are not simple, and the force behind his strange power is not simple either. Once that force awakens, it will be an extremely terrifying existence. The old man took a deep breath, looked at Omir and said meaningfully, someone wants him not to awaken. I see. Omir lowered his head, a thoughtful look in his eyes. My lord, I understand now. It's good that you understand. The old man nodded. He casually glanced at Kay, who was watching the show, and smiled. If I'm not mistaken, that's the good-for-nothing son of Assyria, right? Omir was shocked and took a closer look. Yes, he is the son of Assyria, born by a human woman. He can transform into Beaumont, but has no power, and has always been called a good-for-nothing. He can no longer be called a good-for-nothing. The old man smiled. His bloodline has been fully awakened, and he can even transform into the legendary Golden Beaumont and defeat Omega. Omir's mouth was wide open, and his mouth was wide enough to swallow a duck egg. The old man smiled, looked away, and said faintly, "When the time comes, bring him back." Chapter 441. Boom! With a loud sound, a large hole was smashed in the deck. The Terror Knight's heavy steel blade slashed down, and one of the barbarian bulls immediately knelt down. Jade Lake Ebook, stop fighting! We're not fighting anymore! The strongest barbarian bull shouted. At this moment, he was covered in wounds and couldn't even stand up. The intense energy consumption made it impossible for him to maintain his barbarian bull transformation, and he reverted to his original form. Ron smiled and ordered the skeleton warriors to stop. The barbarian bulls finally had a chance to catch their breath. They supported each other as they struggled to get up. The first one to cause trouble was Inu, who was in the library 56. At this time, the old man smiled faintly. Omir, have you forgotten what happened 5 years ago? 5 years ago, something happened in Iron Cliff City. The humans couldn't stand the oppression of the magic beasts and started an uprising in Iron Cliff City. The powerhouses among them killed a large number of magic beasts and occupied the castle. Within a day, the magic beasts counterattacked and the uprising was quickly suppressed. After suppressing the human powerhouses, the humans in Iron Cliff City, regardless of whether they participated in the uprising or not, were massacred. For a time, all the humans in Iron Cliff City disappeared. Iron Cliff City was part of the Beaumont territory, and this old man was a god realm powerhouse of the Beaumont clan, Beaumont Behemoth Hao Qin. He was the one who gave the order to massacre the humans. 5 years ago, Omir slowly recalled, and his heart couldn't help but tremble. Hao Qin smiled faintly. If they want to challenge the rules, it's not impossible. If they have the strength, I'll even give up the entire Beaumont territory. But if they fail, they have to pay a huge price. I don't know if those humans have made the necessary preparations to challenge the rules. Omir nodded. At least that Ron guy is pretty strong. Pretty strong? That's only relative to humans. He's nothing compared to the magic beast. Let alone us, in the rooms on the 3rd and 4th floors, I can feel several powerful magic beasts. There's at least a level 13 flame troll and a level 14 hydra. Their strength has already reached the sacred domain. Do you think they can't deal with Ron? They're just too lazy to do it. Hao Qin shook his head and said, "Humans are still too weak." "Sir, when do we start?" Omir asked at this time. Chapter 442. The three-masted ship sailed on the endless ocean for a few days before it finally reached the shore. Ron and the rest got off the ship and walked into the bustling harbor. Novel-ranking Ron stepped onto an unfamiliar land, his face blank. Everywhere he looked, there were humans. This is the kingdom of magical beasts? Rainey looked around curiously. Why are there people everywhere? Kay smiled and said, I said before that humans make up the majority of the population in the kingdom of magical beasts. However, you're wrong to say that it's all humans. Look, aren't those magical beasts? Rainey and Ron followed Kay's finger and indeed found a few magical beasts. These magical beasts looked different from humans. They had horns on their heads, and their dark bodies were covered with black scales. They looked different from normal humans. Rainey exclaimed in surprise, "Hey, are these magical beasts? Why do they look different from you after they transform into humans?" Kay said, "Magical beasts are not born with the ability to transform into humans. Since young, they drink something called the transformation potion. After drinking it, they can transform into humans. Some low-level magical beasts don't completely remove their magical beast characteristics after transforming into humans, and that's why they look like this. High-level magical beasts can usually hide their characteristics completely. If you don't look closely, you won't be able to tell." "I see." Rainey nodded and asked curiously, however, "Why do they have to transform into humans?" "Magical beasts transform into humans to reduce their energy consumption. Many of their species are huge, and their energy consumption is naturally higher. That's why they can't stop eating. This is a waste of time. After transforming into humans, they consume less energy and eat less." Kay explained patiently. "No wonder you can eat a cow after every battle." Rainey nodded and looked at those strange fellows. "What species are they?" Kay tilted her head and looked at them. "I can't see clearly, but I think they should be the horned lizard species." Becerra asked, "Ron, where do you plan to go first?" Before Ron had time to answer, he heard a dispute in front of him. "M'lord, I'm selling it." A young man with a human appearance had several baskets at his feet. The baskets were filled with bright red sweet berries. This was a kind of fruit that was produced everywhere in the Noah continent. Not only magic beasts, even humans liked to eat it. At this time, he was holding the edge of a basket tightly, begging bitterly. In front of him, a man from the horned lizard clan was also holding the other side of the basket tightly. It looked like he was snatching it. He glared at him. "Let go, you lowly race." The human man smiled and said, Sir, I really can't do this. These are all for sale. I just came to the kingdom of magical beasts and don't know anything. I still have a wife and children to take care of. Sir, please be magnanimous." "Damn it!" The horned lizard man was impatient. He kicked the human man to the ground, and the bright red berries scattered all over the ground. He cursed fiercely, "Lowly human, so what if I ate a few of your fruits? Eating your fruits means I think highly of you." "What? You actually said no? You must be tired of living." The horned lizard man did not give up and overturned all the baskets at the human man's feet. At the same time, he stomped on them fiercely. The sweet berries were crushed, and the bright red juice flowed everywhere. As it turned out, the greedy horned lizard was attracted by the sweet berries that the human man was selling when it got off the boat. First, it ate a few using its noble status as a magic beast. The human man could only swallow his anger. However, the greedy horned lizard was not satisfied. Instead, it became more aggressive and snatched the fruit. This made the human man anxious. He relied on selling fruits to survive, and in a few days, he had worked for nothing. That was why this scene happened. After stomping on the sweet berries, the horned lizard left in a huff, leaving behind a human male with a long face. He was silently picking up the fruits on the ground that were not stomped on. As he did so, he shed tears. The surrounding humans looked at him sympathetically. How could he do that? Rainey was furious. She reached out and pointed in the distance. "Aren't there guards over there? Why didn't they do anything when something like this happened?" Rainey was referring to the human guards patrolling around the harbor. However, they acted as if they did not see anything. They were used to this kind of thing happening. The culprit was a magic beast. They were afraid that they could not avoid it. That's a magic beast." Kay's face was burning. She felt ashamed for having such a compatriot. However, in her heart, she did not see these people as compatriot. Those humans don't dare to interfere with the magic beast's business. "Humph, magic beasts are all bad," Rainey said indignantly. Kay was even more embarrassed. Only then did Rainey remember that she had scolded Kay as well. I wasn't talking about you. I was talking about those guys. Ron's heart was heavy. He came from a poor background, so he hated this kind of thing the most. But according to Kay, this kind of thing was too common. If he had to care about everything, he wouldn't be able to do anything else. Ron sighed helplessly. But Sarah, this person is quite pitiful. Let's give him some money. However, remember, don't give him too much. Ron was very thoughtful. That human was just an ordinary person. In this place where good people mingled with bad people, giving him too much money would only bring trouble to him. Oh, but Sarah was already feeling compassionate. After getting Ron's permission, she took out a few gold coins from her space bag and handed it over. That human thanked Basara profusely, causing Basara to feel embarrassed. Let's go, Ron said. They walked into this port city called Black Water City. Just as Kay said, there were humans everywhere. Even though it was in the kingdom of magic beasts, it did not look any different from a normal human city. The guards, soldiers, street vendors, and wandering mercenaries were all humans. It was just that there were some shameless magic beasts in human form. Ron walked around for half a day before he realized that this was the territory of the Blackwater Serpent clan. There were some laws here that did not exist in other places. For example, no one was allowed to carry scented sachets or spray perfume because the Blackwater Serpent clan hated these things. The people in charge here were also humans. Due to their outstanding management skills, everything here was well managed. If there were no magic beasts, this would be a prosperous human city. Even though humans did not have strong combat talents, they were very good at production, manufacturing, and management. Even the magic beasts had to rely on humans for this. Even though humans were in charge of everything, Ron knew that the real masters of this city were the Blackwater Serpent clan. They could override the laws they set. This is the largest library in Blackwater City. Let's go in and take a look, Kay said to Ron as she pointed to a tall and magnificent building. Ron nodded and walked in. This library was also built by humans in order to improve the city's taste. However, there were very few knowledgeable magic beasts. Most of the people here were humans. Ron wanted to find some books here. They were things that recorded things that happened 100,000 years ago. Even though Ron already knew some things that happened 100,000 years ago, the more he searched, the more suspicious he found. Ron believed that something must have happened 100,000 years ago that he did not know. No one could tell Ron the truth of what happened 100,000 years ago. Even if Grandpa Homelin was resurrected, it was impossible. He was born in the most glorious era of necromancy. He knew nothing about the decline and destruction of the Scourge Church. The truth could only be found bit by himself. Walking into the spacious hall, Ron looked at the rows of densely packed bookshelves and began to worry. Where should he start looking? Hello, how can I help you? Just as Ron was in a dilemma, a young librarian walked up to Ron and asked politely, "We want to read some books and find some information." Ron thought for a moment and replied, "About 100,000 years ago, the ancient times of 100,000 years ago." The young librarian smiled. It's rare to see someone interested in the history of the ancient times. Nowadays, there aren't many people who want to know about the history of the past. Most of them come to read books related to magic and fighting aura. After complaining for a while, the young librarian smiled and said to Ron, "Those books are on the 3rd floor." "Thank you." Ron smiled and thanked him. "How much does it cost to read a day here?" "It's free." The librarian smiled kindly. "The books here are all free to read, but you can't take them away." "Free?" Ron was a little surprised. It seemed that the academic atmosphere here was very strong. Anyone could come in and read. Other than the Balarax Academy, Ron had to pay gold coins to read books in many other cities' libraries. It was calculated by the number of days, and some of the prices were not cheap. This alone had become an obstacle for many commoners to improve their strength. In the kingdom of magical beasts ruled everything. Human magic and fighting aura were not valued at all, and they could not threaten the status of magical beasts. Therefore, all the libraries here were free of charge. It seems that we will have to stay here for many days. I hope this trip will be fruitful. Ron smiled and said. He took a book from the shelf. Becerra, Rainey, and Kay also took a book from the shelf and placed it on the table, flipping through it page by page. Chapter 443. The library here was too comprehensive. It was believed that it was the books that the early humans had brought with them when they migrated to the continent of Warcraft. Ron and the other three read books in the library during the day and rested in a nearby human-run hotel at night. They read books for 3 days until they were dizzy, but they had no clue. Read. Just as the librarian said, the books here were free, and no one disturbed them for a few days. On this day, Ron was sitting at a table with a large pile of books, half a person high. He was patiently flipping through them, not letting go of any clues. Ron, come and look at this. At this time, Becerra called out, I found something. Ron and the others quickly walked over. Becerra was holding an ancient illustration in her hand, and the 4 little heads looked up. What is this? Ron asked. I don't know, but it looks like it was copied from somewhere. Becerra shook her head and pointed. Ron, look at the content. Ron looked at the place where she pointed and saw some interesting pictures on the ancient illustration. The first picture was of a huge figure descending from the sky. On the ground, some creatures that looked like humans were kneeling. Around the humans, there were some creatures that looked like magical beasts. The huge figure in the picture looked a little strange. He had a bony skeleton face and a tall figure, similar to the skeleton that Ron summoned. No wonder Becerra called him over for everyone to see. The second picture was of the huge figure commanding countless humans to conquer one powerful tribe after another, and finally unifying the whole continent. Ron saw the huge figure sitting on the top of the mountain, accepting the worship of all creatures. From the appearance, he could see that there were dragons among those creatures. The third picture was of humans thriving. During this time, there was a huge leap in undead magic. The fourth picture was of humans controlling skeletons fighting against dragons. The fifth picture was of the huge figure disappearing, and the whole world fell into chaos. The sixth picture was of the flames of war. At first, there were small-scale rebellions all over the world, and then it became more and more intense. The seventh picture, the eighth painting, Ron realized that after he saw Jean Luan, the illustrations at the back became incomplete and blurry. The seventh and eighth drawings could not be seen at all. Kay asked, Brother Ron, is this the Scourge Church of your continent? Even a giant dragon is kneeling at your feet. So powerful. Kay's eyes shone with admiration as she spoke. Ron did not answer his question. Instead, he fell into deep thought. After a while, he raised his head and asked, Is there more? Becerra shook her head. No, these illustrations were originally copied. When they were copied, they were already incomplete. Ron pondered for a moment. Where did these maps come from? Becerra picked up the book, casually flipped through it a few times, and found a line of words. Floating Island, Ancient Ruins. Floating Island. Ron searched his mind, but he did not seem to have heard of this name at all. Floating Island? Kay's eyes lit up, and a hint of excitement appeared on his face. Kay, do you know something? Becerra knew her younger brother well. She could tell that Kay seemed to know something. Ron also raised his head to look at her. Kay nodded and said, I know about the floating island. It's located in Normansun, and is part of the Normansun Sky archipelago. This island is submerged under the water for half a year, and only rises from the sea for a short period of time. Oh right, the Normansun Sky Archipelago is part of the dragon's territory. I see. Ron nodded. He thought for a moment. Kay, do you know where this island is? I want to take a look. No problem. Kay smiled. That place isn't restricted. It's just a little far. We can reach it in a month or so. Ron smiled and nodded. At this time, his gaze fell on the title page of the book, and his expression suddenly froze. That was because he saw a familiar name. This name, he had heard from Mentor Vivian more than once. That was Tristalum Khan. This book was written by him, but this book was very old, and the cover of the book was already gone. After knowing the author of this book, Ron was even more determined to go to the floating island, Ancient Ruins. He wanted to find out what was going on. Ron and the other three left Blackwater City and headed east. Their goal was the floating island, the location of the ancient ruins. Crash, crash, a huge roar resounded through the sky. This was the famous Nigger waterfall in the continent of magical beasts. It spanned hundreds of meters across the mountains, and the water splashed dozens of feet high. Let's rest here tonight, Ron said. Everyone agreed and took out things from their space bags to start packing. This was not the first time they had camped in the wild. Doing this was a walk in the park. I'll go get some firewood, Kay said, and then ran off into the distance. Becerra was preparing the ingredients for cooking while Rainey and Ron went to set up the tent. They were destined to spend the night here. Rainey and Ron worked together to set up the tent. Ron straightened up and was about to heave a sigh of relief when Becerra ran over in a panic. Oh no, Ron, something happened to Kay. What? Ron was shocked. He immediately left Rainey and ran towards Kay. On a mountain out of the blue, Kay was in a standoff with a tall and mysterious elder. Kay's eyes were full of seriousness, and her body was emitting a strong aura. The elder opposite her, on the other hand, had a relaxed expression. This elder was Hao Qin, the head of the Beaumont family. He was also the deputy chairman of the council and a god-level martial artist. I didn't expect you to come, Grandpa. Kay's face was calm. She did not feel close to this grandfather in the family. She only had a deep hatred for him. Ever since she was young, this grandfather had never really cared about her, even when she was bullied by the Beaumont family. The corner of Hao Qin's mouth twitched a few times, revealing a smile. Kay, my dearest grandson. Haha, I remember the last time we met. You were still a child. I didn't expect you to grow so big in the blink of an eye, grandson? Kay sneered. Grandpa, do you really think I'm your grandson? Ever since I was young, you so-called family members have only treated me as a useless person. How is it? I think Omega has already told you everything, right? That's why you came to find me? Hao Qin smiled slightly and shook his head. Kay, no matter how you deny it, Beaumont's blood flows in your body. This is something that cannot be changed. Kay sneered and did not say anything. Hao Qin paused. I admit that I didn't care enough about you in the past, causing you to have a deep prejudice against me. However, I didn't expect you to have the most noble golden bloodline of the Beaumont family in your body. Kay, I'm indeed here to bring you back. With the golden bloodline, you are the strongest warrior of the Beaumont family. You are an outstanding descendant of the Beaumont family. I'm not going back. Kay's eyes showed intense anger. I will never go back to that inhumane Beaumont family. Grandpa, let me tell you, I will never forget how my brother died. It was because he was a human. When he was just born, he was thrown to his death by his father. Haha, if I wasn't born as a Beaumont, I'm afraid I would have ended up like him, right? Kay clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. You have no humanity at all. What you want is the best descendant. Let me tell you, I will never go back to that kind of place. Hao Qin did not show any dissatisfaction towards Kay's strong resistance. He smiled and patiently said, Kay, we are the noble Beaumont family. We are not lowly humans. Where is humanity? He smiled. Besides, survival of the fittest is the law of nature. Those humans who are destined to be inferior at birth are useless to us Beaumont family. They will only add to the shame. Death is the best ending for them. You! Kay was so angry that her whole body trembled. She did not expect Hao Qin to make such a shameless theory sound so dignified. In the family, no one felt it more deeply than her. She, who was weak, had always been bullied. That was a family that only followed strength. There was no kinship in this family. Finally, Kay's anger rose to the extreme. She shouted and her body began to transform rapidly. At the same time, she punched out. Kay made her move. Her opponent was her grandpa, the strongest person in the Beaumont family. Boom! The earth shook and the mountains shook. A powerful force exploded. Smoke and dust rose from the ground. In the fog, an intense golden light was extremely dazzling. At this time, Kay had already flown 10 feet above the ground and was floating quietly. At this time, she had transformed into a golden Beaumont. Her ferocious face was full of hatred. Hao Qin still maintained his human form. After receiving Kay's punch, his expression did not show any discomfort. At this time, Hao Qin was also floating quietly in the air. Looking at Kay, who had transformed into a golden Beaumont, her eyes were full of excitement. Golden Beaumont. That's right. It's really a golden Beaumont. The legendary golden Beaumont. Hao Qin barely suppressed his excitement. Taking a deep breath, he said, "Kay, come back with me. Let's forget the past misunderstandings. If you are willing, I can punish those people that you don't like. With your excellent golden bloodline, you are definitely qualified to inherit the Beaumont family. In the near future, all of this will be yours." "No, never," Kay said loudly. "Stop dreaming. Even if you are my father, you can't force me, let alone my grandfather. I'll tell you the truth. I'd rather die outside than return to the Beaumont family." Hao Qin snorted. His eyes flashed fiercely. "Kay, this is not up to you. Even if you are willing or not, you don't have any choice today." "Then, let's try." Kay's eyes were burning with fighting spirit. Her body shone with a golden light. It was as if a golden fist had materialized, shining with golden light. In the face of the Beaumont family's strongest person, she was getting closer and closer to him. He had no way out. He could only fight. Kay. At this time, Ron, Becerra, and Rainey had already arrived. When they saw the scene before them, they were shocked and shouted loudly. Kay saw Ron. On second thought, her heart sank. She hurriedly shouted, "Ron, don't come over." Chapter 444. Date: November 26th. Who is he? Ron looked. He did not recognize the old man in front of him. Surrogate bride for, first daughter of a general. This book came from Book River. Kay shouted, "He is my grandfather, the Godrealm warrior Hao Qin. Brother Ron, he wants to catch you." "Run, Hao Qin?" Ron was shocked. He did not expect this ordinary-looking old man in front of him to be the deputy chairman of the council, Hao Qin. According to Grandmondine, it was this Hao Qin who strongly advocated for the execution of a heretic like him. The CEO's love for him weighed 1,000 pounds. "You are Hao Qin?" Ron asked in disbelief. Hao Qin did not answer. His hawk-like gaze swept over Ron, making him shiver uncontrollably. "Run." Ron did not think much. He moved his body, turned around, and ran out. Hao Qin smiled faintly. "You want to run when you are right in front of me?" Too late. Ron had just run a few steps when he heard the earth shake. The ground cracked open, and a 10-meter-tall mud wall rose up and came crashing down on Ron. Boom! The mud wall came crashing down and Ron was buried in it. "Ron!" Becerra and Rainey cried out in surprise and pounced on Ron. Roar! Kai was finally enraged. The veins on his fists bulged, and in the blink of an eye, a golden light burst forth. His huge fist carried a violent vortex of energy as it blasted towards the frail-looking Hao Qin. In the face of the powerful golden Beaumont's fist, Hao Qin smiled slightly. He did not panic and slowly raised one hand. Suddenly, the world fell silent. It was as if even the air had stopped flowing. A look of shock appeared in Kay's eyes. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. One finger. That's right, one finger. Hao Qin had only used a single finger to block the fist of Kai, who had activated his golden bloodline. Furthermore, he was still in his human form. In other words, he hadn't used any strength at all. The difference between the two was simply too great. How is this possible? Kay's teeth were chattering. He could almost hear his own heartbeat in the empty room. Love is an unspeakable wound. Hao Qin smiled. Kay, you're strong, but you're not strong enough to threaten me. Kay's heart sank. Bah! Bah! Ron poked his head out of the soil. Just now, he was almost buried alive. Ron. Big brother Ron. Becerra and Rainey dashed over and asked with concern, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." Ron gritted his teeth and looked at the sky. His opponent was a Godrealm master. Now that things had developed to this point, he had no choice but to fight for his life. "It's dangerous here. You guys leave quickly," Ron said, and his body disappeared with a whoosh. A figure slowly rose and appeared behind Hao Qin. It was the zombie Phelon. It was emitting the power of the sacred domain without restraint. Behind it was Ron, who was riding on the gargoyle. "You're here?" Hao Qin smiled coldly. "Not bad. You know you can't escape. Fighting with your life is the best choice. At least it's better than begging for mercy." He paused and glanced at the zombie like a vulture. "This is what you necromancers call controlling corpses. You're only a master-level master, but you have the power of the sacred domain. You're indeed a heretic." Ron's gaze didn't change at all. In the face of such a powerful God's domain powerhouse, it was useless to be afraid. He calmly asked, "Lord Hao Qin, I would like to know why you advocated for Zhang Xiao to issue such a kill order at the meeting. Did I do something wrong?" Hao Qin paused and smiled proudly. "You don't need to know, and I have no obligation to explain it to you." At this moment, Kay's eyes were completely red as she yelled, "Big brother Ron, hurry up and leave. I'll stop him." After saying that, she pounced forward. Hao Qin smiled calmly. "You're overestimating yourself. Do you think you can stop me?" Kay did not answer. She waved her fists and attacked Hao Qin crazily. The strong force kept attacking, causing the sky to darken. "Kay, thank you." Ron nodded. He accepted Kay's kindness. He took a deep breath, and his eyes showed a trace of determination. "But since we can't escape, let's face it together. Kay, I'm coming." Ron's hand moved, and a small green ball spun in his palm and blasted towards Hao Qin. Death coil. At the same time, the zombie stretched out his hand, and the flames on his body spun like silk. At the same time, his staff shone with a dazzling light, and a flame left his hand. Flaming blade. The powerful death coil and flaming blade attacked at the same time and exploded on Hao Qin's back. The flaming blade bounced back, while the death coil disappeared. Hao Qin turned his head and sneered. "Don't be nervous. It'll be your turn soon. By the way, your spiritual attack is not bad. Unfortunately, it's useless against me." After he finished speaking, he completely ignored Ron's attack and focused on dealing with Kay. Kay was like a mad tiger, her body shining with golden light. Her pair of iron fists struck like a storm, and every punch was filled with Beaumont's strength. Compared to Kay, Hao Qin was like a small boat in a stormy sea, rising and falling with the waves. He looked extremely dangerous, but he could not be shaken at all. "Sister Becerra, what should we do?" Looking at the intense aerial battle in the sky, Rainey's face was filled with anxiety. Read the full text of the death prisoner. Basara did not answer, but her eyes were full of worry. Her hands slowly clasped in front of her chest, and she softly prayed for Ron. Kay, even though you've worked very hard, the difference between you and me can't be made up with just fighting spirit. Now, the game is about to end. Finally, after figuring out Kay's true strength, Hao Qin no longer had the intention to continue fighting. He laughed sinisterly, found Kay's position, and violently punched. The fist was very slow, but it became bigger and bigger in Kay's eyes. Dong! Kay's body shook violently as if she was struck by lightning. Not long after, her huge body fell straight down from the sky. Kay! Ron, Basara, and Rainey cried out in shock. Ron's reaction was the fastest. He immediately turned around and rode the gargoyle in the direction where Kay fell. The gargoyle's speed was really too slow. No matter how fast Ron increased his speed, he could not catch up with Kay's falling speed. Bang! His huge golden Beaumont body crashed into the mountain like a cannonball, making a loud boom. At the same time, it slid down the mountain wall until it reached the side of the Nigger waterfall. Kay, are you okay? Ron landed on the ground and immediately helped Kay up. He saw that Kay's strength was no longer enough to maintain the golden Beaumont transformation. She directly turned back into a human. At that moment, her face was as white as a sheet of gold, and she was only breathing weakly. She had long fainted. This bastard, he actually didn't even let his own grandson off, Ron cursed harshly. When he turned around, his body suddenly froze. In front of him stood a tall figure who was pampered by a wealthy family. Wife, I only love you. Big ending. He saw that Hao Qin had unknowingly stood in front of him, his cold gaze constantly sweeping over him. The spiritual corpse that Ron had painstakingly refined, Fa Lon, who had the strength of the sacred domain, had already turned into a pile of minced meat behind Hao Qin. In just an instant, the spiritual corpse Fa Lon had been defeated. Suddenly, Ron's heart felt as if it had fallen into an ice cellar. His body also trembled from fear. He finally knew that he had met a godlike opponent. No matter how hard he struggled, begged for mercy, or resisted with all his might, he could not avoid the fate of defeat. There was only one path in front of Ron, and that was death. There was no other choice. Heavens! Why did I have to meet such a powerful opponent? Heavens! Can you tell me why? Ron's heart was dripping blood. His nails dug deep into his flesh. Facing the undefeatable Hao Qin, Ron's eyes were filled with intense resentment. Hao Qin's expression was still indifferent. He expressionlessly looked at Ron and calmly said, Ron, rest in peace. I can't tell you too much. I can only say that the power you chose was a mistake. And this mistake is irreparable. After he finished speaking, he reached out and tapped Ron's forehead lightly. Bang! Ron's body seemed to have been struck by lightning. He fell to the ground and twitched violently a few times. His raised hand suddenly fell down, and he stopped moving. Ron, Basara screamed at the top of her lungs. Her body rushed out with all her might, but she was firmly held back by Rainey. Rainey's eyes were red, but she clenched her teeth and tried not to cry out loud. She knew how scary that elder was. That was why she held on to Basara and did not let her die. She did not want to be entangled with the blood-sucking demon. Phew! Hao Qin sighed softly. He quietly looked at the sky and closed his eyes, feeling the humidity brought about by the Nigger waterfall. What a comfortable wind! All of this is over. The power of the dead spirits will never be reborn in this plane. After a while, Hao Qin opened his eyes. He gently lifted Ron and casually threw him away. Ron's body flew up unconsciously and fell down the Nigger waterfall, which was hundreds of feet high. Plop! Ron's body fell into the turbulent lake, creating a few waves. In the blink of an eye, he was swept to the bottom of the lake by the whirlpool. Hao Qin quietly watched Ron's body disappear until he was sure that he was dead. Then, he turned around and picked up the pornographic novel. The unconscious Kay glanced around and saw Basara and Rainey on the other side. She smiled slightly and disappeared with a swoosh. Basara and Rainey jumped in fright. Their bodies kept shrinking back, and their bodies were trembling in fear. Their eyes were filled with extreme fear. Hao Qin appeared in front of them in an instant. His cold gaze was sizing them up. You two can go. I don't kill humans who have no combat ability. After a while, Hao Qin finally spoke. He lifted Kay with one hand and flew up. In the blink of an eye, they had disappeared into the distance. Ron. Basara came back to her senses and flew towards the nigger waterfall. All she could hear was the sound of water rumbling by the waterfall. There was no sign of Ron anywhere. Brother Ron. Tears fell from Rainey's eyes. Kay was taken away, but Ron was dead forever. Chapter 445. Master. In an unknown dimension, an old woman was running at full speed and pushed open the door to the room at the end of the corridor. Pornographic novels. Master. This old woman was Mary, the lady boss of that mysterious store. At this moment, her face was full of anxiety. The middle-aged man who was taking a nap was startled awake. When he saw who it was, he was stunned and said, "Mary, it's you. What happened? Why are you in such a hurry?" Reporting to Master, bad news. Mary was older to begin with, and the rapid running made her breathless. She panted and said, "Master, it's not good. Ron is dead." Ron? What Ron? The middle-aged man who was still not fully awake was confused. However, in the next moment, he quickly came back to his senses and his eyes widened. "What did you say? That Ron is dead?" Mary nodded. "Master, I just received the news that Ron was killed by Hao Qin." "Hao Qin? It's actually him?" The middle-aged man's eyes were full of astonishment. He sat down weakly on the seat behind him with a pained expression. He closed his eyes and shook his head, sighing. "Sigh, I was still a step too late." Mary's face was also full of regret. "Master, it's not your fault. You just came back and didn't have time to deal with these things." The middle-aged man said with a pained expression, "I knew something was wrong when I saw the bounty order from the council. I just came back, and I went to look for Book 56. Sock's noble fingers covered her mouth, and an incredulous expression appeared on her face. She actually knew this person. "Madam, you know him?" The guard captain was stunned. It couldn't be so coincidental, right? A random person he saved was actually known to the princess consort. The princess consort didn't answer. She quickly bent down and hugged Ron, taking off her coat and wrapping him up. She didn't care that Ron's muddy body had dirted her dress. The guard captain frowned. "Madam, I want to save him." At this moment, the princess consort raised her head and stared at the guard captain with her beautiful eyes. There was an unprecedented determination on her face. The guard captain hesitated for a moment and said, "Madam, this person's background is unknown. If he poses any danger to Madam, I'm afraid His Highness will blame us. I think it's better to let us do it." The princess consort ignored him and directly carried Ron's thin body. She quickly ran to her luxurious carriage. At the same time, along with the sea breeze, she threw out a sentence. Chapter 446. After an unknown amount of time, Ron slowly woke up. He slowly opened his eyes and saw that he was lying on a spacious bed. The bed was inlaid with gorgeous patterns, and the quilt was made of the most expensive silk. It was light and warm when draped over his body. 56 book room. The surrounding walls were full of luxurious decorations, and artistic murals were hung on the wall. In the closet on the other side, a fire was crackling, and the room was warm and cozy. Ron woke up, sat up, and looked around. From the environment here, it was definitely something that only nobles could enjoy. Looking at everything in front of him, Ron couldn't help but be stunned. What is this place? How did I get here? Ron vaguely remembered that after his head was hit by Hao Qin, he fainted. Then, he felt his body fly up like a cloud, and fell on the water surface. At that moment, he had a brief moment of clarity, but then he was sucked into the water by the strong suction force. He was dragged to the bottom of the lake. He struggled with all his might and finally floated to the surface. At that moment, he was already exhausted. Fortunately, he grabbed a piece of wood and floated to the sea along with it. Luckily, he was able to save his life. The lake under the Nigger waterfall had a strange suction force. Even a goose feather couldn't float up. That was why Hao Qin was relieved to throw Ron into the Nigger waterfall. According to his assumption, the unconscious Ron would definitely die at the bottom of the lake. He didn't expect that Ron would rely on his strong will to survive to escape from the fatal suction force at the bottom of the lake. Did someone save me? Ron thought for a moment. This was the only possibility. At this time, the door was pushed open with a creak, and a pretty figure walked in. When she saw Ron, her eyes lit up. "You're awake." The person who came in was a young girl wearing a maid's costume. From her appearance, she was also a beauty. Ah, yes. Ron was a little embarrassed. After all, his attire didn't fit in with the luxurious decorations here. At this time, he suddenly lowered his head and found that his clothes had been changed. It's you who saved me?" Ron was tongue-tied in an unfamiliar environment. He struggled to get off the bed to bow. "It wasn't me. It was Madame who saved you." The beautiful maid smiled and reached out to stop Ron from bowing. "We found you at the seaside. At that time, you almost died. Fortunately, our Madame knew you and saved you." Before Ron could ask, the considerate and beautiful maid had already explained everything in the most concise language. Then, like serving a young master, she pressed him back to the bed and covered him with the quilt. She said with a smile, "It's good that you're awake. I'll inform Madame right away." "Madame? Does she know me?" Ron was stunned for a moment. When he wanted to ask again, the beautiful maid had already walked out, leaving only her beautiful back in the corridor. "Who saved me? She knows me?" Ron searched through all his memories, but he couldn't think of such a person. In the unfamiliar magical beast continent, there was actually someone who knew him? Basara, Rainey, and Kay. When he thought of these three people, Ron's heart couldn't help but ache. He was saved by a lucky person and kept his life, but he didn't know how they were doing. Kay is Beaumont, who has the golden bloodline. He should be fine. Hao Qin won't kill him, but I'm afraid Basara and Rainey. When he thought of this, Ron's heart sank. Even though the two of them were just maids, he had always treated Rainey as his own sister. Basara, needless to say, was already his woman. Even though the two of them didn't have any power, they were the most important people to Ron. Hao Qin. Ron's eyes were filled with hatred. He gritted his teeth and raised his head, his nails digging deep into his flesh. Not long after, Ron's muscles relaxed. It was as if his soul had been sucked out of his body. Helplessness and sadness gnawed at his heart like a demon. The realm of the gods. This realm was still too far away for Ron. He didn't know if he would have the power or even the courage to take revenge in this lifetime. At this moment, the sound of hurried footsteps could be heard. It sounded like someone was running in high heels. "Madam, madam, don't run so fast. Be careful of the baby in your stomach," the beautiful maid exclaimed. Not long after, the vermilion door with carved flowers was suddenly pushed open. A beautiful young woman appeared in front of Ron. She was wearing a gorgeous white gauze dress, revealing a deep cleavage in front of her chest. Her cold and elegant face exuded nobility. Her stomach was slightly bulging as if she was a few months pregnant. Her face was filled with surprise. Ron. You are. Ron paused for a moment. A vaguely familiar face appeared in front of him. Not long after, his eyes lit up, and he exclaimed in surprise. Man and I. It's you. The person who saved Ron was none other than his classmate and good friend, Man and I, who used to live in the same dormitory. Ron couldn't help but sigh at how the world had changed so much when he saw Man and I, who was originally from a poor family, had the noble temperament of a rich young lady. So it was you who saved me. I was still wondering who I knew in the kingdom of magical beasts. Ron said with a chuckle. But since I know it's you, then there's no need to thank me. Man and I laughed and punched Ron fiercely without regard for her status. Come on, it's just you and me. There's no need to thank me. After the two laughed, Ron asked seriously, Oh right, Man and I, where is this place? Why are you here, and… He hesitated for a moment as he looked at Man-Ni's expensive clothes, a puzzled expression on his face. As if she had seen through Ron's thoughts, Man and I pursed her lips and smiled. This is where the envoy of the kingdom of Moran is. As the princess of the kingdom of Komodo, I should naturally be here. The princess of the kingdom of Komodo? Ron was shocked. He didn't expect Man and I to marry into the royal family after not seeing her for a while. This was undoubtedly a good thing for her, who was born in a poor family. Man and I, congratulations, Ron said sincerely as he gave his blessings to Man and I. Thank you. Man and I smiled and gracefully bowed in a noble manner. The current Man and I was no longer that charming student. At this moment, she was full of beauty and nobility. Thinking back to when he was in dormitory 302, other than Aurora, Man and I was the best fighter. She was also one of the best in close combat. But now she was a princess. Ron couldn't help but sigh in his heart. At this moment, Man and I asked, Oh right, Ron, weren't you chased by the Holy See at that time? What happened after that? Ron briefly told Man and I about his encounters after leaving the Balarax Academy. Man and I exclaimed repeatedly. Later, when she heard that the Holy See persistently chased after him, Man and I said angrily, these swindlers will die a horrible death one day. Although Man and I cursed, there was nothing she could do. Compared to the Holy Roman Empire, the kingdom of Komodo was only a small country. Ron's gaze fell on Man-Ni's bulging belly. He smiled and said, I'm not as good as you. You even married into the royal family. Look, you even have a child. Man and I smiled shyly with a blissful expression. She touched her belly and said, It's still early. It's only been a few months. Sigh, he's always kicking me, Ron chuckled and said, I have to say this in advance. Once the child is born, I'll be his godfather. No one can fight with me for this. Okay. Man and I agreed immediately. She said with a smile, then it's settled. Once the child is born, I'll let him recognize you as his godfather. When the time comes, I'll let him learn necromancy magic from you. Remember how impressive you were back then? Ron smiled bitterly when he heard this. This was still impressive. Now, he was being chased like a stray dog, fleeing everywhere. Suddenly meeting an old friend, Ron felt like he had met a confidant. He chatted happily with Man and I. They talked about many interesting things in the past, such as the ranking battle in room 302 and that wretched fatty. When the conversation reached a happy point, Man and I couldn't help but giggle. Traces of warmth appeared in the room. At the same time, Lady Man-Ni's two beautiful maids were guarding outside the door, trembling with fear. Who is that person? Why is Madame talking for so long? The maid on the left asked. Her eyes looked towards the end of the corridor from time to time, revealing an anxious expression. I don't know. Madame looked very happy. It can't be her lover, right? The maid on the right made a bold conjecture. The maid on the left pondered for a moment. Looks like it. Madame's relationship with that person isn't ordinary. When I rescued him, I told him to sleep in the guard's room, but Madame refused. She insisted that he sleep on her bed, this letting a strange man sleep on Madame's and His Highness's bed. Is that okay? The slightly younger maid on the right was flabbergasted. If His Highness comes back at this time, that's what I'm most worried about. The maid on the left looked around again. At this time, her expression changed abruptly. Not good. At this time, footsteps came from the end of the corridor. The thing that the maids were most worried about had happened. His Highness Komodo had returned. Behind him was a group of people. They were all His Highness Komodo's attendants. Walking in front was His Highness Komodo. Following beside him was a beautiful woman. The two chatted and laughed as they walked towards the room at the end of the corridor. What do we do? What should we do? The two maids were as anxious as ants on a hot pan, pacing around in circles. They recognized the beautiful woman beside the prince. She was the princess of the Kingdom of Moran. The Kingdom of Moran was a country where a woman was the king. The current king of Moran was this princess's aunt. Now that Princess Mani was chatting happily with Ron in the room, and the prince had returned with the princess of the Kingdom of Moran. If they didn't handle this well, it would definitely become an awkward diplomatic incident when they met. The worst thing was that the fellow called Ron was still sleeping on Madame's bed. Now they wouldn't be able to clear their mouth. Once this matter spread, the prince's qualification as the heir would probably be lost. At this time, His Highness Komodo had already arrived at the door of the room and made an inviting gesture. I didn't expect Your Highness to take time out of your busy schedule to visit my wife. I am deeply grateful for this. The princess smiled and waved her hand slightly. We're all on the same side. Your Highness doesn't need to be so courteous. Your country's princess is pregnant. As a princess, I should personally congratulate her. Your Highness, please. His Highness Komodo extended his hand. Your Highness. Chapter 447. This is. Her Highness glanced at Prince Komodo beside her. In the 56th Library, Malyshenkov was truly praised for his heroic deed of defeating a dragon. This was something that many other experts in the realm of the gods couldn't match up to. This heroic deed was destined to be admired by millions of people. Ron thought for a moment before asking, then, where did sword god Malyshenkov go? Did he die? No. Hera smiled. On the contrary, the water-type dragon that he defeated fell in love with him, regardless of everything. In the end, the two of them got together and even got married. Sword god Malyshenkov also became a foreign dragon. Foreign dragons? Ron was shocked. Yes. Hera nodded. Foreign dragons were creatures that were not dragons. After joining the dragons, they obtained the same rights as the dragons. These creatures included magical beasts, orcs, elves, and humans. However, orcs and elves who thought that they were powerful would not take the initiative to join foreign dragons. Thus, foreign dragons were mostly magical beasts and humans. Dragons were the pinnacle of existence in the Noah continent. No matter which country it was, when they saw a member of the dragons, they would treat them with the respect of a monarch. Foreign dragons also had the same rights. The status of a foreign dragon could only be bestowed by the leader of the dragons. Once bestowed, it represented the acknowledgement of the dragons of that person's status. It was extremely difficult to obtain the status of a foreign dragon. Even those who were related to the dragons would find it difficult to obtain this status. While Hera and Ron were chatting in front, Rum and Mani were whispering in the back. Rum said, Mani, don't you think that something is wrong with Her Highness Hera and Ron? Mani was confused. What's wrong with that? Rum frowned. Don't you think Her Highness Hera treats Ron too well? I don't think I saw them get so close when we were at the Balavax Academy. Mani was shocked. You're saying Her Highness Hera has fallen in love with Ron? Rum said, That's possible. Look at the way Her Highness Hera looks at Ron. It seems a little strange. Man's eyes lit up. If that's the case, then it's really a good thing. Lonsim smiled. If Brother Ron can marry into the Moran kingdom, it will be a good thing. The Queen of the Moran kingdom, Hera's aunt, has plans to abdicate. She has no daughters, only 3 sons. According to the tradition of the Moran kingdom, only women can inherit the throne. Looks like the next Queen of Moorland is a pornographic novel. Definitely not Hera. So if Ron marries Hera, he'll be the Queen's husband. Yes. Manny stood behind Hera and Ron with a faint smile on her face. Suddenly she exclaimed softly. What's wrong? Rum asked. Chapter 448. Princess Hera walked along the long corridor with light step. When she reached the end of the corridor, she gently knocked on the door. Novel rankings, come in. A deep voice came from the room, indicating that she could enter. Hera pushed the door open, walked in, and gently closed the door. The room was very gloomy. Not only were the decorations in the room, even the curtains were drawn. It was broad daylight, but there was not a single ray of sunlight in the room. A small crack was gently opened on the windowsill to let in the sunlight. Even so, the room was still very gloomy. This atmosphere was suffocating. A middle-aged man sat quietly at the corner of the window. His gaze was fixed on the only ray of sunlight. He sat there motionlessly, holding a wine glass in one hand and gently swirling it. He was dressed in gorgeous clothes. His hair was long and his face was full of stubble. The wine glass was empty, and he held it in one hand. His expression was dull. No one knew how long he had been in this position. This man was Hera's father, Pluto. He was also the brother of the current queen of the kingdom of Moran. Although he was of noble birth, Pluto did not have any noble title or position. He was just an ordinary person. He lived in the palace, but always locked himself in his room. The door was tightly shut, the curtains were drawn, and he did not communicate with anyone. He lived a dark life. Even so, no one in the kingdom of Moran underestimated him. This was because he had an extremely special identity, and this identity overshadowed all the noble titles in the kingdom of Moran. This identity was that of a foreign dragon. Father. Hera leisurely bowed. In the etiquette of nobility, even in front of her own father, she had to bow. This was not entirely out of respect, but a habit formed over many years. Seeing Hera walk in, Pluto turned around and forced a smile on his face. Hera, you're here. Hera nodded and slowly walked over. She tenderly caressed her father's chiseled face and sighed. Father, you've gotten thinner. Pluto was a handsome man when he was young, but now he was only 40 years old. He looked as old as a 60-year-old man, and his body weighed less than 90 pounds. Pluto nodded and did not speak. Hera gently leaned her face against her father. Father, are you thinking about Mother again? Pluto's cloudy eyes flashed, and he slowly raised his head. There's not a day when I don't think about her. But it's not good for you to lock yourself in your room all day. Hera looked up and said softly. Pluto sighed and tears flickered in his eyes. He said calmly, I hate him. If it wasn't for him, your mother and I would live happily together. Pluto murmured. He looked out of the window and his eyes were filled with longing. He was reminiscing about the time he spent with his wife. Hera knew that he referred to her grandfather, the current chief of the dragons, Are Firth the Dark Dragon. He was the one who had separated her father and mother. It was no wonder that her father was full of resentment towards him. The reason for their separation was very simple. It was because Pluto was a human. In Raphael's eyes, inferior creatures like humans were not worthy of being with dragons. However, Pluto actually gave birth to a descendant with his precious daughter. This was something he could not tolerate. If not for his daughter's pleading, with Raphael's ruthless personality, he would not have allowed Pluto to live until now. Being a foreign dragon in exchange for a permanent separation. This identity did not bring honor and dignity to Pluto, but endless resentment and humiliation. Hera advised, "Father, you have to take care of yourself. If Mother sees you like this, she'll be sad." Pluto took a deep breath and did not answer her. He turned his head and asked calmly, "What's the matter?" Hera hesitated. "His Highness the Komodo Prince and Princess have come to the Moran Kingdom. They want to see you." "I won't see them." Before Hera could finish her sentence, Pluto was already enraged. He raised his voice and roared, "Do you think I don't know that they came to see me to gain political capital? Tell them that there's no way. I won't see them, and I won't see anyone. Hera, remember this. Don't bother me with these things in the future." Hera could only remain silent as she looked at her father, who was about to explode. She lowered her head and did not dare to talk back. Before she came, she had expected this outcome. But she could not stand the pleading of her classmates, Lonsim and Manny, so she clenched her teeth and agreed. This was a pornographic novel. Her heart was full of grievances, and she was about to cry. Looking at the aggrieved Hera, Pluto also felt that his words were a little harsh. Although he was angry, he should not have vented it on his daughter. Gently stroking his daughter's silky hair, Pluto said, "I'm sorry, my words may have been a little harsh, but you should know that I won't do anything with that identity. Not in the past, not in the future." Hera nodded. "I'm sorry, Father. I'll remember this." Pluto said, "All right, you can go now. Let Father be alone." Hera stood up, pulled up her skirt with her white jade-like hands, and bowed. "Father, I'm leaving." With that, she turned and left. Pluto returned to his previous state, holding a wine glass in one hand and looking out the window quietly. Hera walked to the door of the room. She seemed to have remembered something and suddenly stopped in her track. She turned around and said, "Oh right, Father, there's one more thing." Pluto looked at the window as if he did not hear her and did not move. Hera bit her lip. "I found someone who looks like Moody, but I can't be sure if it's him." "Moody?" The thin figure sitting on the chair shook violently. He turned around with a trace of astonishment in his eyes. "Moody? What did you say?" "You found Moody? I can't be sure if it's him." Hera hesitated and said, "It's just a suspicion. They have the same black hair and black eyes, but there's one thing. When I first saw him, I felt that he looked very similar to you." Hera smiled. "When I first saw him, I sent him an invitation, but he didn't take it seriously. Now, he's come to the kingdom of Moran. You've brought me a lot of Moodies over the years. Unfortunately, none of them are. They're either too old, or their backgrounds don't match." Pluto smiled. "Your elder brother Moody's was only a baby when he was taken away by Larfield. I'm afraid he's already 20 years old now. To be honest, even if Moody's stood in front of me now, I'm afraid I wouldn't recognize him." He paused for a moment. "Unless he can produce a keepsake." After R.A. Firth took Moody away when he was 1 year old, there had been no news of him. Pluto had sent people to look for him everywhere, but it was to no avail. God knew where R.A. Firth took him. If Hera hadn't been breastfeeding in her wife's arms at that time, she might have suffered the same fate. A defenseless baby might really be dead. Pluto sighed. He had completely lost hope in finding his biological son, Moody. R.A. Firth didn't seem like a soft-hearted person. Hera hesitated for a moment. "He's in the kingdom of Moran now and might leave soon. Father, do you plan to see him?" "No." Pluto shook his head. It was extremely painful for hope to turn into disappointment. In his current state, he couldn't take any more blows. "All right then." Hera's eyes were filled with disappointment. I'll send him back. With that, she gently opened the door and prepared to leave. Wait. At this moment, Pluto stopped her and asked, You said that he's already here. He's here. He's waiting outside, Hera said honestly. Pluto's face was full of hesitation. After a while, he made up his mind. He took a deep breath and said, Since he's here, let him come in and meet me. Pluto finally changed his mind. He missed Moody so much that he didn't want to let go of any opportunity. A smile finally appeared on Hera's face. All right, I'll let him in now. Outside the gate of the Moran Palace, Lonsim and Manny were waiting anxiously, and Ron was also waiting. However, Ron was very curious. Ramsim, why do you have to meet Hera's father? Haven't you already met Hera's aunt? Ramsim laughed. Ron, you don't understand these things. Being able to meet Pluto had a special meaning in itself. As a foreign dragon, he was regarded as a member of the dragon race. This was no different from meeting a dragon. Even though Pluto would not do anything for them, if this matter were to reach their father's ears, it would be a different story. Ron shrugged. Although he didn't understand the meaning, he could more or less guess. However, he had never been interested in these things. At this moment, Hera quickly walked out. Hera. Sister Hera. As soon as Hera came out, Ramsim and Manny quickly went up to her. Manny asked, Sister Hera, how was it? Is Lord Pluto willing to meet us? Hera shook her head. I'm sorry, I've tried my best. My father doesn't agree to meet you. Sigh. Ramsim sighed deeply. His eyes were full of regret. Manny comforted him. Forget it, Your Highness. Don't take it to heart. Sister Hera has already helped us a lot. Manny knew that Hera had done a lot for Lonsim to be able to meet the Queen of the Moran Kingdom. Otherwise, it would be impossible for a prince who wasn't even the heir of a small kingdom in the human world to be formally received. Ramsim said, It's always a pity that I couldn't meet Lord Pluto after coming to the Moran Kingdom. Your Highness, Princess Hera, I hope you can convey my respect to him. I will. Hera replied with a smile. Everyone could tell that she was being perfunctory, but Ramsim also knew that Hera had tried her best. I'm sorry, Sister Manny. I couldn't help you. Hera took Manny's hand and said apologetically. At the same time, she glanced at Ron next to her. It's okay, Sister Hera. I understand, Manny said with a smile. She had a vague feeling that Hera didn't do all this for them. Rather, it seemed like she was trying to please Ron. When they were at Balarak's academy, Hera's dormitory and their dormitory 302 were only acquaintances. They were far from being friendly. Why did she do all this for Ron? Manny couldn't help but ponder. Could it be that she really liked Ron? Chapter 449. What? Rum and Manny couldn't believe their ears. Lord Pluto, a noble foreign dragon, actually wanted to meet Ron? For no reason at all. What was the reason for this? Ron was also stunned. After a while, he asked, Why? Hera smiled. You'll know when you get there. Ron hesitated. He knew the status of foreign dragons in the Noah continent, but this Lord Dragon wasn't related to him at all. Why would he take the initiative to meet him? As if seeing Ron's hesitation, Hera smiled and said, Ron, it's fine. My father doesn't mean any harm. He just wants to meet you. Okay. Ron finally nodded. With his relationship with Hera, it wouldn't be good for him to refuse an elder's invitation. He agreed. Looking at Ron's back as he walked into the promenade, Rum's eyes were filled with envy. He really wanted to go in himself. At this moment, he turned around and asked Hera. He turned to Hera and asked, Princess Hera, why does Lord Pluto want to meet Ron? Hera smiled mysteriously and softly said, It's a secret. Perhaps Hera had told him beforehand, but Ron walked in front of the guard. The guard only glanced at him before letting him in. Under the guard's guidance, they walked through the long corridor and came to a room. Ron hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open and entering. The room was very dark and even a little suffocating. The air was filled with a murky smell, mixed with a strong smell of alcohol. A middle-aged man sat by the window, staring out of the window. He didn't even notice Ron coming in. Ron also felt a little abrupt when he suddenly came in. He didn't know how to address the man in front of him. He even forgot to ask Hera for his name. "Lord?" Ron called out tentatively. The figure moved and turned around, sizing up Ron. In an instant, Pluto's eyes widened in disbelief. The next moment, his body couldn't help but tremble. "Moody! Moody!" Ron scratched his head in confusion. He unconsciously looked back to make sure that there were only the two of them in the room. "You called me?" Ron asked strangely, pointing at his nose. Pluto struggled to get up, but perhaps he had been sitting for too long, or perhaps he was too agitated. His legs gave way, and he fell heavily into the soft chair, gasping for breath. "Child, please, please come closer, let me take a good look at you." Pluto pointed at Ron and said excitedly, "Ah!" Ron was a little surprised, but he quickly walked over and stood quietly in front of the middle-aged man. At this time, Ron finally saw the middle-aged man's appearance clearly. His long blonde hair hung down and his face was almost indistinguishable. His skin, which had not been exposed to sunlight all day, was sickly pale. His face was unshaven, as if it had not been cut for a long time. His entire person was in a decadent state. Pluto reached out his trembling hand. "Child, you squat down." Ron hesitated for a moment, then bent down. At this time, the withered hand had already reached out to his face, gently caressing it. At this moment, Pluto's face was full of excitement as he muttered, "So similar, so similar." Looking at Ron's appearance, Pluto's wife's face appeared in his mind. At this moment, Ron's appearance almost completely overlapped with his wife. She was a black dragon, but when she transformed into her human form, she also had a waterfall of black hair and black eyes that sparkled like gemstones. You're really not called Moody?" Pluto asked in a trembling voice. "Moody?" Ron had heard this name more than once. Only now did he recall that when he first met Hera, she had also asked him if his name was Moody. "Could it be that I look very similar to this Moody?" Ron thought to himself, then shook his head and said, "Sir, my name is Ron, not Moody." Ron. Pluto had completely calmed down at this time, and he could not help but laugh in his heart. Moody was only 1 year old when he was taken away by Hera Firth. How could he remember his own name? "So your name is Ron." Pluto smiled and gently pointed to the chair next to him, motioning for Ron to sit down. Then he said kindly, "I was rude, Ron. When I first saw you, I felt that you looked like my wife. I thought you were." He paused for a moment, then suddenly changed the topic. "By the way, Ron, who are your parents? Where are they?" "I don't have parents." Ron shook his head. "I was an orphan when I was young. Grandpa Zari picked me up by the river and raised me. Unfortunately, he passed away." Speaking of this, Ron's eyes turned red, and he almost shed tears. His relationship with Grandpa Zari was very deep, and nothing could replace it. "Orphan?" Pluto raised his eyebrows. He caught this word sensitively. From this point, the possibility of Ron being Moody increased greatly. Ron and his wife looked too similar. If it was confirmed that Ron was not Moody, Pluto was afraid that he would not be able to bear this blow. "Child, how old are you this year?" Pluto asked in a pleasant manner. "I'm 20 years old this year. I just had my 20th birthday some time ago." Ron counted with his fingers and answered. However, his birthday started from when Grandpa Zari picked him up. At this time, Ron had sensed something. This middle-aged man actually took the initiative to ask about these things. His heart almost jumped out of his throat. Could this have something to do with his background? All this time, Ron had never regarded finding his biological parents as a very important matter. Perhaps it was because he had been a vagrant since he was young and was used to being alone, but it did not mean that he had not silently thought about his background in the dead of night. 20 years old. After hearing Ron's age, Pluto's face became excited again. That's right. It had been 20 years since the day Firth took Moody away. In that case, his age was exactly the same. White face, orphan background, and the same age. At this moment, Pluto was almost certain that the Ron in front of him was definitely his own son, Moody. If there was such a coincidence in the world, Pluto could only accept it. Pluto suppressed the excitement in his heart. He touched Ron's head and asked, "Child, when your adopted grandfather picked you up, did he have any keepsakes? For example, jewelry or something like that?" Keepsakes. Ron thought for a while. He untied something from his neck and handed it to Pluto. "Sir, is this it?" It was a sick-shaped jewelry. The sapphire-like pendant emitted a soft light. Ron had worn this thing for 20 years. Grandpa Zachary had said that this thing seemed to be related to his background. After receiving the sick-shaped pendant that was still warm, Pluto's eyes became dull. Scenes of the past surfaced in his heart. This pendant was personally made by him as a token of love to his wife. Although it was not very expensive, it had a special meaning. His wife had always liked it and always carried it with her. However, since Moody was born, this thing was worn by his wife's favorite son, Moody. Pluto's body trembled violently. His weak hands kept shaking, and the expression on his face kept changing. "Sir, what's wrong with you?" Ron saw that Pluto seemed a little strange and hurriedly reached out to support him. Finally, Pluto couldn't hold it in any longer and began to cry like a child. Murky tears flowed down his cheeks continuously, and he cried with extreme sadness. "Sir, what's wrong with you?" Ron was anxious. He did not expect that this pendant would cause such a big reaction from the middle-aged man. He asked in surprise, "Sir, do you recognize this pendant?" "Child." Pluto gently stroked Ron's thin but slightly resolute face. Tears flowed down his old face. "I'm your father, father." Ron was shocked. He originally thought that this pendant had something to do with the middle-aged man, but he never expected that he was his father. "Father? You're my father?" Ron's mind was blank. Like other children, he had imagined his father's appearance countless times, but he never thought that this decadent middle-aged man in front of him was his father. "Yes, child." Pluto's body moved, and his face was full of excitement. "Your face, your age, and your background can all prove that you are my son, Moody. And this pendant," Pluto gently picked up the pendant in his hand. "This is an ornament I made myself. I gave it to your mother, and then your mother gave it to you. It's the testimony of our love. Father, you're really my father." At this moment, Ron no longer had any doubt. He suddenly threw himself into Pluto's arms like a child who had left home seeing his family. He was extremely excited. My child, my child." Pluto hugged him gently and said excitedly, "I finally see you. I never thought that I would be able to hug you again in my lifetime. I didn't even dare to dream of it in the past." The father and son hugged each other and cried for a long time. After a while, the two finally suppressed their emotions and released each other. Pluto smiled. "Child, let me take a good look at you." Ron smiled embarrassedly and wiped away the tears at the corner of his eyes. He had not cried for a long time. Just now, in his excitement, his tears flowed uncontrollably. Gently stroking Ron's thin face, Pluto said with heartache, "Child, you've been an orphan since you were young. You must have suffered a lot, right?" Ron shook his head. "Father, Ron grew up with Grandpa Zachary and never felt that it was hard." He then told Pluto about Grandpa Zachary. After hearing that Grandpa Zachary had passed away, Pluto could not help but be moved. When he heard that Grandpa Zachary had passed away, he sighed. What a pity! If he was still alive, I would have brought him to the palace to enjoy a good life. Looking at his father's body that weighed less than 90 kilograms, Ron also felt a little distressed. He had too many questions. He did not know why his father had become like this. At this moment, he hesitated and asked, "By the way, Father, where's my mother? Who is she?" Please share. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.